The evening sun cast long shadows across the grand lobby of the Monarch Hotel as Rhodes Calloway heard words that would haunt him forever. Hidden behind a newspaper in the corner of his own hotel's bar, disguised as a simple business traveler, he watched an elderly guest wipe away tears while telling a story that would change everything he thought he knew about the empire he'd built. Thaddeus Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the Manhattan skyline fade into dusk. At 45, he'd built the Calloway Hotel Group from a single struggling property into a chain of 30 luxury hotels across the country. Tonight, however, success felt hollow. Another record quarter, Ravenna Caney, his VP of Operations, announced from behind him. Revenue up 17% across all properties. She paused, likely noticing his unusual silence. Thaddeus, this is good news. He turned from the window, taking in the familiar sight of his executive office. Awards lined the walls, each one marking another milestone in his journey from hotel management trainee to CEO. But lately, something felt off. The mounting complaints from loyal guests, the declining satisfaction scores, the high staff turnover, all hidden beneath glossy financial reports. "Do you remember Jasper?" he asked, picking up a framed photo from his desk. It showed a much younger version of himself standing beside an elderly man in a hotel uniform. Ravenna shook her head. "Before my time. He was the concierge at my first hotel. Taught me everything about true hospitality." Thaddeus ran his finger along the frame's edge. "Jasper used to say, 'We're not in the hotel business. We're in the business of making memories.'" The latest guest satisfaction report lay open on his desk. The numbers were technically acceptable, but the comments told a different story. Lost its personal touch. Not what it used to be. Just another corporate hotel. "I haven't stayed in one of our properties as a guest in 5 years," he admitted. "Haven't worked a shift since becoming CEO. How can I know what we're really offering? If I'm stuck in this office looking at spreadsheets?" Ravenna's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What are you suggesting?" Thaddeus opened his laptop, pulling up the reservation system for the Monarch Hotel, their flagship property in Chicago. "I'm checking in as a guest next week. Not as CEO, but as Griffin Parker, a traveling consultant." "That's," Ravenna started. "Crazy?" He smiled. "Maybe. But I need to see things as our guests do. No special treatment, no advance notice." "The board meeting is next week," Ravenna protested. "We're presenting the expansion plans for the West Coast properties." "Postpone it." Thaddeus was already typing an email to his assistant. "I'll be unreachable for personal reasons. You'll handle things here. And if someone recognizes you..." He stood, walking to a mirror on the wall. At 45, he still had the same dark hair, though flecked with distinguished grey now, but few people below the executive level had met him in person. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said, pulling out his phone to show her. A photo. It displayed a subtly different version of himself. Glasses, shorter hair, styled differently, casual clothes instead of his usual tailored suits. "You're serious about this?" "The quarterly numbers are strong," he acknowledged, "but something's missing. Jasper would say, 'We've lost our soul.'" He picked up the guest satisfaction report. "I need to know if he's right." That evening, after Ravenna left, Thaddeus stayed in his office, meticulously planning his cover story. Griffin Parker, management consultant, recently divorced, traveling for work. The backstory had to be detailed enough to be believable but simple enough to maintain. He opened his private safe, removing an envelope containing the emergency documents he'd prepared months ago. Credit cards and ID in his alias's name. He'd had them created legally through proper channels, intended for security purposes given his position. Now they'd serve a different purpose. His phone buzzed with messages about upcoming meetings and decisions requiring his attention. Thaddeus ignored them, focused instead on studying the Monarch's recent staff changes. Most of the employees who'd known him personally had moved on or retired. The few who remained were in senior positions, unlikely to interact with regular guests. As night fell over the city, he found himself drawn back to the window. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were checking into his hotels, each carrying their own stories and expectations. He'd built this company promising personalized luxury, a home away from home. When had that promise become just another marketing slogan? His eyes fell on a small plaque on his desk, a gift from Jasper years ago. It read, "In hospitality, the smallest gestures create the biggest memories." Thaddeus picked it up, remembering the day Jasper had retired. "Don't let success make you. Forget what it feels like to be a guest," the old man had said. Next week, he'd remember. Next week, Griffin Parker would experience the Monarch Hotel just like any other guest. And Thaddeus Blackwood would finally learn if his empire of luxury had kept its promises or lost its way in the pursuit of profits. Little did he know, this decision would lead him to a discovery that would shake the very foundation of everything he'd built. The following morning, Rhodes Calloway arrived at his office earlier than usual, the weight of his decision to go undercover still heavy on his mind. The daily executive briefing papers sat untouched on his desk while he scrolled through the latest guest reviews on his tablet. Between the polite corporate responses and measured star ratings, he could sense a growing disconnect from what had once made his hotels special. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Octavia Pierce, his head of guest relations, entered with an unusually serious expression. "We need to discuss the Wellington situation," she said, placing a thick folder on his desk. The Wellington name made Rhodes sit up straighter. The Wellingtons had been loyal guests since before he owned his first property, staying at his hotels over 50 times in the past decade. "What happened? They've cancelled all their future reservations," Octavia reported, opening the folder. "Every single one. Mr. Wellington sent this letter personally." Rhodes picked up the handwritten note, his eyes scanning the elegant script. The words hit him like physical blows. 20 years ago, I proposed to my wife in your Chicago property. Our children grew up looking forward to our annual family gatherings in your suites. But last month, during our stay at the Monarch, we were just another confirmation number. The magic is gone. Your hotels have become beautiful shells, perfect in appearance but empty of heart." "Have we reached out?" Rhodes asked, his throat tight. Octavia nodded. "Our customer retention team sent the standard escalation package. Upgraded rooms, loyalty points, the usual compensation." "The usual compensation," Rhodes repeated softly, the words tasting bitter. He thought of the Wellingtons, Richard with his booming laugh, Margaret with her kind eyes, their children growing up year by year in his hotels. Now they were reduced to a retention statistic, a problem to be solved with points and upgrades. Standing abruptly, Rhodes walked to his office window. The morning sun glinted off the skyscrapers, each reflection a reminder of how far he'd come. But at what cost? His phone buzzed, another executive meeting about to start. Before he could respond, his assistant hurried in. "Mr. Calloway, the investors are waiting in the conference room, the quarterly presentation." "Cancel it," Rhodes said, his voice firm. "Sir?" "Cancel everything for the next 2 weeks." He turned to face their shocked expressions. "Octavia, do you remember what we did when we got a complaint at my first hotel?" She'd been with him since the beginning, starting as a front desk clerk when he was still a hands-on owner. "We visited the guest personally," she said slowly. "Sat down, listened, made it right. When did we stop doing that? When did we start thinking points and form letters could replace genuine care?" Rhodes picked up the Wellington letter again. "This isn't just about one family. It's about every guest who chose us, trusted us with their precious moments, and found themselves treated like transactions. His decision crystallized. The undercover stay he'd planned couldn't wait for next week. Walking to his private bathroom, Rhodes retrieved the small bag he'd prepared with his disguise. "Ravenna will handle the executive duties," he told his assistant. "Octavia, I need you to do something specific. Book a room at the Monarch for tonight, under the name Griffin Parker. Regular reservation, nothing special." "What are you going to do?" Octavia asked, though her slight smile suggested she already knew. Rhodes removed his Italian silk tie, replacing it with a modest department store version. "I'm going to remember what it feels like to be a guest. No special treatment, no executive privilege. Just another traveler with a reservation." "The board won't like this," his assistant warned. "The board likes our profit margins," Rhodes replied, his voice hardening slightly. "But we're losing something more valuable than money. We're losing our soul." He thought of Jasper, who taught him that luxury wasn't about thread counts or brand names. It was about making people feel valued. Somewhere along the way, between expansion plans and shareholder meetings, he'd forgotten that fundamental truth. Opening his desk drawer, Rhodes removed his executive ID and building passes. In their place, he carefully arranged Griffin Parker's identification. For the next 2 weeks, Rhodes Calloway is taking a personal leave. Any emergencies go through Ravenna. "And if someone recognizes you at the Monarch?" Octavia asked. Rhodes smiled, putting on the glasses that would become part of his disguise. "Few people below the executive level have ever met me in person. I'm counting on that corporate distance I created. Ironic, isn't it?" Before leaving, he paused at Jasper's old photo. The elderly concierge's words echoed in his mind. "Luxury without humanity is just expensive emptiness." The Wellington. Letter felt heavy in his pocket as he left his office, a tangible reminder of what he needed to discover. As his private elevator descended, Rhodes Calloway began to fade away, replaced by Griffin Parker, a simple business consultant about to check into the Monarch Hotel. What he would discover there would be far more shocking than lost guest loyalty or declining service standards. But for now, watching the floor numbers tick down, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the nervous anticipation of stepping into the unknown. The doors opened onto the private garage where his driver waited. "Not today, Marcus," he said, walking past the luxury car. "Mr. Calloway is away on personal business." Walking out onto the busy Manhattan street, he merged into the crowd of morning commuters. For the first time in over a decade, he was just another face in the city. His phone buzzed again, probably more meeting notifications or crisis alerts. He ignored them all. Tonight, he would check into his own hotel as a stranger, and perhaps in doing so, he would rediscover what had made the Calloway name synonymous with exceptional hospitality in the first place. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of an upscale men's clothing store in downtown Chicago, where Rhodes stood before a mirror, studying his reflection. The transformation into Griffin Parker had begun the moment he'd boarded a commercial flight instead of his private jet, a cramped middle seat that served as his first taste of normal travel in years. "Can I help you find anything else, sir?" asked the sales associate, eyeing his selections with barely concealed confusion. Rhodes had deliberately chosen items that his usual self would never wear: off-the-rack suits in modest grey, shirts without monograms, and ties that wouldn't be caught dead in his normal wardrobe. "No, these will do," he replied, conscious of softening his usual commanding tone. Griffin Parker wouldn't have a CEO's authoritative voice. The sales associate's name tag read Trevor, and Rhodes noticed how the young man's forced smile never quite reached his eyes. Exactly the kind of service detail he needed to start observing again. In the store's fitting room, Rhodes methodically constructed his new identity, The expensive watch was replaced with a modest timepiece. His signature cufflinks, a gift from the hotel association marking a decade of leadership, stayed in their case. The bespoke Oxford shoes gave way to comfortable loafers more suited to a traveling consultant. But the physical changes were the easy part, as he worked a temporary hair dye through his distinguished grey temples, darkening them to match the rest of his hair. Rhodes practiced Griffin Parker's backstory aloud. Management consultant from Seattle, he murmured to his reflection. Recently divorced, no children, traveling for a client project. Each detail had been chosen carefully, designed to be forgettable while explaining any business knowledge he might accidentally reveal. His phone buzzed again, Ravenna this time. He answered using his new persona's voice, slightly higher and less confident than his natural tone. "Everything all right?" "The board is asking questions," she said without preamble. "And the Monarch's general manager called. Your usual suite is ready for your surprise inspection next week." Rhodes smiled grimly. "Cancel it. In fact, cancel any special preparations at any property. For the next 2 weeks, Rhodes Calloway doesn't exist." "About that," Ravenna hesitated. "Are you sure about the timing? The Asian investors are arriving next month, and the expansion plans will wait," he finished firmly. "Sometimes you have to step back to see what's right in front of you." After hanging up, Rhodes completed his transformation. The designer glasses frames were replaced with simple reading glasses. A subtle change in his posture, slightly less straight, more casual, helped shed the military-perfect bearing that had been drilled into him at business school. At a drugstore down the street, he purchased items Griffin Parker would travel, with basic toiletries instead of luxury brands, a cheap phone charger, generic aspirin. Each item was another brick in the wall between Rhodes Calloway and his new identity. The final touch was the wedding ring, or rather, its absence. Rhodes had never married, but Griffin Parker was recently divorced. The subtle tan line he'd created on his ring finger using self-tanner would suggest a wedding band recently removed. These small details could make or break his cover story. In a small cafe across from the Monarch, Rhodes sipped mediocre coffee and watched his own hotel through different eyes. The doorman's greeting seemed mechanical, the bellhops more focused on their phones than arriving guests. A family struggled with their luggage, while 3 staff members chatted nearby. His fingers itched to send a text to the general manager, but Griffin Parker wouldn't know the hotel's management. Instead, he took notes on his new phone, forcing himself to see his flagship property as any other business traveler would. The coffee shop's barista approached with a pot of coffee. "Refill?" she asked, then added, "You've been staring at that hotel for an hour, planning to rob the place." Rhodes chuckled, testing out Griffin's more casual laugh. "No, just remembering something." He gestured at the building. "I proposed to my wife there, ex-wife now." The lie felt strange on his tongue, but the barista's face softened with sympathy. "That's rough. First time back?" "Yeah." Rhodes let some genuine emotion color his voice, not from a fictional divorce, but from seeing his life's work through strangers' eyes. "It's different than I remember." "Everything changes," she said kindly, filling his cup. "Maybe you'll make some new memories this time." Rhodes checked his new watch, the one that didn't cost more than a car, and gathered his deliberately modest belongings. The afternoon was fading, and Griffin Parker had a hotel reservation to check in for. Standing outside the Monarch's entrance, Rhodes took a deep breath. The grand facade soared above him, glass and steel reaching toward the Chicago sky. How many times had he walked through these doors as the owner, barely noticing the details that guests experienced? Now, rolling his cheap suitcase behind him, he was about to enter his own creation as a stranger. Just before stepping inside, he caught his reflection in the polished brass door handles. Griffin Parker stared back at him, a middle-aged consultant with sensible clothes and tired eyes. The transformation was complete. Now came the real test, walking into the heart of his empire, not as its king, but as one of the thousands of guests whose experiences he'd been taking for granted. And somewhere in this building, an elderly guest story waited to shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about his hotels, his employees, and himself. The automatic doors slid open with a familiar whoosh, welcoming Griffin Parker. Into the Monarch Hotel, Rhodes Calloway, as far as the world was concerned, had vanished into thin air. The Monarch's lobby stretched before Rhodes like an alien landscape. He'd personally overseen its renovation 2 years ago, selecting every marble tile and crystal fixture. But now the space felt different. Without the protective bubble of his CEO status, he noticed things that executive walkthroughs had never revealed. The signature fragrance he'd commissioned from a French perfumer, meant to evoke luxury and comfort, seemed overwhelming near the entrance. A guest in front of him sneezed twice while wheeling her luggage across the threshold. The marble floors, while stunning, created an echo chamber of rolling suitcases and clicking heels that bounced off the high ceilings. 2 reception desks stood empty, while a line of guests waited at the third. The young woman working it looked arid, her perfectly pressed uniform already showing signs of a long day. Her nameplate read Melody. Rhodes took his place in line, fighting the instinct to walk straight to the priority check-in desk, reserved for VIP guests. "I'm sorry for the wait," Melody called out to the line. "My colleagues will return shortly." Her smile remained professional, but Rhodes caught the slight tremor in her voice. Where were the other staff members? The Monarch service manual mandated a minimum of 3 front desk agents during peak check-in hours. 20 minutes later, he finally reached the desk. His fingers drummed against the counter, a nervous habit he'd cultivated for Griffin Parker's personality. "Reservation for Parker," he said, presenting the ID and credit card he'd secured for his alias. Melody's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Yes, Mr. Parker, I have you with us for 2 weeks. Standard king room." She paused, frowning slightly at the screen. "I apologize, but your room isn't quite ready. Housekeeping is running behind schedule today." Rhodes checked his watch. 4:30 p.m., well past the guaranteed check-in time. "I see. How long should I expect to wait?" "No more than 30 minutes, Melody assured him, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't certain. "We can store your luggage, and the bar offers a complimentary beverage for any check-in delays." Standard protocol, but Rhodes remembered when such delays had been rare enough to make the news. Now Melody delivered the compensation offer with practiced ease, suggesting it happened regularly. "I'll wait in the bar, then," he said, watching as a bellhop collected his bag. The young man's name tag read Diego, but he didn't offer his name or make eye contact, another small deviation from the service standards Rhodes had once insisted upon. The Monarch's bar, pretentiously named the Crown and Scepter, occupied a prime corner of the lobby. Rich mahogany and leather surrounded a marble-topped bar that stretched along one wall. Rhodes chose a seat that offered a clear view of the reception area, ordering a modest glass of wine that Griffin Parker might select. "Rough day?" the bartender asked, setting down his drink. Unlike the front desk, the bar was fully staffed. 3 bartenders for only a handful of guests. "Just a long flight," Rhodes replied, maintaining his cover story. "The room's not ready yet." The bartender, Marcus, according to his name tag, nodded sympathetically. "Been happening a lot lately. New management company changed all the schedules, cut staff hours. Housekeeping can barely keep up." Rhodes nearly choked on his wine. "New management company? Some efficiency experts or something?" Marcus continued, wiping down the already spotless bar. "They show up every few months with their clipboards and spreadsheets, tell us how to do our jobs better. Never actually worked in a hotel, mind you, but they've got charts showing how we can turn rooms faster with fewer people." A cold feeling settled in Rhodes' stomach. He'd hired Carlton Consulting 6 months ago to optimize operations across all properties, but their recommendations weren't supposed to affect service levels. Yet here was the evidence, right in front of him. Understaffed. Desks, delayed rooms, overworked employees. His observations were interrupted by raised voices from the reception area. An elderly couple was expressing their frustration to Melody, whose professional composure was starting to crack. "This is unacceptable," the gentleman said, loud enough to carry across the lobby. "We've been coming here for 12 years. Each visit, the service gets worse. Where is Mr. Harrison? He used to make things right." Rhodes remembered Richard Harrison, the former general manager who'd retired last year. His replacement had come highly recommended, with an MBA and impressive efficiency metrics. But Harrison had known every regular guest by name, had walked the floors daily, ensuring everything met his exacting standards. The elderly couple eventually accepted a room upgrade and dinner vouchers, but their words lingered in the air. 12 years of loyalty, reduced to a transaction of compensation amenities. As the afternoon wore on, Rhodes noticed more details that would have horrified his younger self. The fresh flowers, once changed twice daily, looked tired. A section of copper trim near the elevator needed polishing. The front desk remained understaffed as the check-in line grew longer. His phone buzzed. A text from Ravenna. "Board wants emergency meeting. Expansion investors threatening to walk. Need you back." Rhodes typed a brief response. "Handle it. Something's more important." Turning off the phone, he returned to his observations. Finally, after 45 minutes, Melody approached him in the bar. "Mr. Parker, your room is ready. I've added breakfast vouchers for the inconvenience." Following Diego to the elevator with his luggage, Rhodes caught fragments of conversation. Between two housekeepers hurrying past. "Impossible with these new schedules. Can't maintain standards. No time for details anymore." The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture. But something told him this was just the surface. Somewhere in this hotel, an elderly guest's story waited to reveal even deeper problems. For now, though, he needed to experience what his customers lived through every day, starting with a room that had been rushed to readiness by an overworked housekeeping staff. As the elevator ascended, Rhodes wondered how many other decisions made in boardrooms and consulting meetings had slowly eroded the very essence of what had once made his hotels special. The answer, he suspected, would be found not in spreadsheets and efficiency reports, but in the stories of guests and staff he'd stopped listening to long ago. Room 17 was supposed to be one of the Monarch's premium accommodations. Rhodes had approved the room designs himself 2 years ago during the hotel's last renovation. But as Diego opened the door and wheeled in his luggage, the disparity between vision and reality became immediately apparent. "Will you be needing anything else, sir?" Diego asked, lingering by the door. His tone suggested he hoped the answer would be no. "Actually," Rhodes said, adopting Griffin Parker's slightly uncertain manner, "could you tell me about the hotel's amenities? I might be entertaining some clients during my stay." Diego's response was telling. Instead of the enthusiastic overview specified in the service manual, he merely gestured to a tablet mounted on the wall. "Everything's on the digital concierge, sir. Just tap what you need." Without waiting for further questions, he slipped out, leaving the room key on the entry table. Alone, Rhodes began a methodical inspection. The room wasn't dirty. The Monarch hadn't fallen that far, but the signs of rushed cleaning were evident to his trained eye. The duvet had been hastily straightened rather than properly made. Water spots clouded the bathroom mirror. A used coffee pod remained in the machine. Moving to the window, he tested the electronic blinds. They stuttered slightly on their descent, the smooth whisper he remembered replaced by an arthritic groan. The city view remained spectacular, but a layer of dust on the windowsill suggested corner cutting in the daily cleaning routine. His phone chimed, the hotel's app welcoming Griffin Parker and suggesting he make dinner reservations at Azure, the Monarch's signature restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd insisted on implementing this technology, arguing it would enhance guest convenience. Now he wondered if it had just created another barrier between staff and visitors. The tablet Diego had referenced drew his attention. Tapping it awake, Rhodes navigated through the digital concierge system. Restaurant menus, spa services, local attractions, all available at the touch of a screen. But where was the human touch? The personalized recommendations, the warm conversations that often led to discovering what guests really wanted. A commotion in the hallway caught his attention. Through the door, he could hear a heated discussion between what sounded like housekeeping staff. "Can't keep up with these turnaround times," a woman's voice insisted. 25 minutes per room isn't realistic. "Corporate standards," another voice replied, resigned. "They time us now. Every minute over schedule affects our performance metrics." "And what about actual cleaning? These aren't factory products. We're assembling." The voices faded as they moved down the hall, but their words lingered. 25 minutes per room. Rhodes remembered the old standard. 45 minutes minimum for a thorough cleaning. When had that changed? More importantly, who had decided that efficiency metrics were more important than cleanliness standards? Deciding to test the service, Rhodes called the front desk. After 6 rings, a harried voice answered. "Front desk, how may I assist?" "This is Mr. Parker in 1217. I'm trying to work, but my desk lamp seems to be broken. I'll send engineering right away, sir." The response was prompt, but felt rehearsed. 45 minutes later, no one had arrived. Rhodes called again. A different voice apologized, promising immediate attention. Another 30 minutes passed. Finally, a knock announced the arrival of maintenance. The engineer, an older man named Salvador, according to his badge, apologized profusely. "Sorry for the delay, sir. I'm covering 2 sections today. Budget cuts, you know how it is." As Salvador fixed the lamp, a simple, loose connection, Rhodes engaged him in conversation, playing the role of a curious guest. "Been with the hotel long?" 17 years, Salvador replied, pride mixing with something like sadness in his voice. "Used to have a team of 12 engineers. Now we're down to 7, covering the same number of rooms. These new management consultants, they think everything can be solved with apps and automated systems." Rhodes thought of the maintenance tracking software he'd approved last quarter, promised to streamline operations and reduce staffing needs. On paper, it had looked brilliant. In reality, "Had a pipe burst last week," Salvador continued, gathering his tools. "Took us 4 hours to respond because the system kept rerouting the work order. In the old days, a guest would call down, we'd radio our nearest team member. Problem solved in 20 minutes. After Salvador left, Rhodes sat at the newly fixed desk, opening his laptop to log his observations. The document was growing longer by the hour. Each note represented a small erosion of the standards he'd once held sacred. Reduced housekeeping time per room, 45 mins to 25 mins. Engineering staff cut by 42%. Digital systems replacing human interaction. No proactive maintenance schedule visible. Staff rushed and apologetic. Service delays accepted as normal. The elegant room suddenly felt like a museum piece, beautiful but hollow, maintaining the appearance of luxury, while the foundation crumbled beneath the surface. A knock at his door interrupted his notes. Opening it, he found a young woman in housekeeping uniform. "Evening turn-down service, sir?" Before he could answer, her radio crackled. "Maria, need you on 7. Guest complaint about bathroom cleaning." "I'm doing turn-down on 12, she protested. "Skip it. This is priority." The voice held no room for argument. The housekeeper, Maria, offered an apologetic smile. "Sorry, sir. Maybe tomorrow." She hurried away, leaving Rhodes staring at the space where another service touchpoint had vanished. He returned to his laptop, adding another note: "Turn down service. Now optional, abandoned." Below it, he wrote a question that had been growing in his mind since check-in. When did we start choosing efficiency over excellence? Outside his window, Chicago's lights twinkled as evening settled over the city. Somewhere in this building, guests were forming impressions, making memories, or trying to, and somewhere an elderly guest story waited to reveal how far his hotel had really fallen. But first, he had a dinner reservation to keep at Azure. Time to see if his flagship restaurant had maintained its standards, or if it too had sacrificed quality on the altar of efficiency. Azure Restaurant occupied the Monarch's entire 42nd floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Chicago's glittering skyline. Rhodes had spent millions creating this space, determined to make it the city's premier dining destination. Now, as Griffin Parker, he waited at the host stand while 3 staff members huddled over a computer terminal, apparently struggling with the reservation system. "I'm so sorry for the delay, sir," the hostess finally said, her name tag identifying her as Sophia. "Our system is being temperamental tonight." The familiar flash of frustration in her eyes suggested this wasn't a rare occurrence. "No problem," Rhodes replied, maintaining his cover persona's patience. "I have time." Sophia's professional smile wavered slightly, becoming more genuine. "That's refreshing. Most guests aren't so understanding lately." She lowered her voice, glancing at her colleagues. "Especially since the new system rolled out. Corporate says it's more efficient, but—" "But?" Rhodes prompted gently. "The old system wasn't fancy, but it worked. Now we spend half our time apologizing for technical issues." She shook her head, catching herself. "I shouldn't complain. Your table is ready, Mr. Parker." The table wasn't one of Azure's prime window locations. Those were reserved for VIP, guests and loyalty program elites. Instead, Rhodes found himself seated in a corner that he'd never paid much attention to during his executive visits. From here, the dramatic city views were partially obscured by support columns. His server, Vincent, approached with the practiced grace of a fine dining professional. "Welcome to Azure, sir. Have you dined with us before?" "First time," Rhodes replied, noting how Vincent's shoulders tensed slightly at those words. New guests meant uncertain expectations, unknown preferences, variables that could affect the performance metrics he'd likely been trained to maintain. "Our chef's tasting menu's particularly popular," Vincent suggested, but his recommendation lacked enthusiasm. Though tonight, given some temporary staffing issues in the kitchen, the à la carte menu might be more reliable. Rhodes scanned the menu, his menu, the one he'd helped develop with renowned consultants. The prices remained ambitious, but Vincent's hesitation suggested the execution might not match them anymore. "What would you recommend?" Rhodes asked, watching carefully. Vincent glanced around before leaning closer. "Honestly, the duck used to be extraordinary. Our signature dish, but since the new purchasing policies, well, let's just say the quality isn't what it was. The salmon is still reliable." The honesty was refreshing if disturbing. Rhodes ordered the salmon, along with a glass of wine that cost less than Griffin Parker might reasonably spend. As Vincent walked away, snippets of conversation from nearby tables painted a picture of Azure's decline. Not worth the prices anymore. Didn't remember when they used to. Standards have really... A commotion near the kitchen drew his attention. The executive chef, new since Rhodes's last personal visit, was berating a line cook in full view of several tables. The professional quiet of fine dining couldn't quite mask his words. Can't serve this. Cost controls. Think ingredients grow on trees. Rhodes remembered approving new food cost guidelines 6 months ago. The consultants had insisted they could maintain quality while reducing expenses. Watching the chef throw away what looked like a perfectly cooked piece of fish, he wondered how many similar scenes played out nightly. His wine arrived, and with it came an unexpected conversation. Vincent, perhaps encouraged by his earlier honesty, lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Been here long?" Rhodes asked, indicating the restaurant. 6 years, Vincent replied. "Started as a food runner, worked my way up. It was different then." He paused, seemingly weighing whether to continue. "We had regulars who came weekly, knew them by name, knew their preferences. Now it's all about table turnover rates and check averages." What changed? Everything became about numbers, how fast we clear tables, how many items we upsell, how efficiently we process payments. Vincent's voice held no bitterness, only resignation. "The iPad ordering system saves time," they said. "But guests used to love discussing the menu, getting personal recommendations. Now we just hand them tablets." Rhodes glanced at the device sitting on his table, another technological improvement he'd approved. The screen displayed Azure's menu items with professional photos and wine pairing suggestions, all algorithm-generated based on guest data. "The other night," Vincent continued, warming to his subject, "an elderly gentleman asked about a dish his late wife used to love here. In the old days, we'd have talked about it, maybe had the kitchen prepare something similar. Now, I had to tell him to check the digital menu's search function." The salmon arrived, perfectly plated but somehow soulless. Vincent's earlier warning proved accurate. It was reliable, but not remarkable. As he ate, Rhodes observed the dining room through new eyes. The service was technically proficient, the food professionally prepared, but something vital was missing. The warm interactions, the personal touches, the feeling that each guest mattered as an individual rather than a set of data points. Near the end of his meal, Rhodes witnessed a scene that crystallized everything wrong with Azure's evolution. An elderly couple at a window table was celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary. The woman mentioned to their server that they'd had their first date in this very restaurant 15 years ago. The server's response should have been warm, engaging, perhaps triggering a complimentary dessert or champagne toast. Instead, she briefly smiled and directed them to the tablet to rate their experience, mentioning the loyalty points they'd earn for completing the survey. Rhodes added detailed notes to his growing document. Personal interaction replaced by technology, staff afraid to deviate from rigid protocols, quality sacrificed for cost control, regular guests feeling disconnected, historic relationships ignored, human moments lost to efficiency metrics. As he signed Griffin Parker's name to the check, Rhodes noticed something else, a small framed photo near the service station, easily missed behind a plant. It showed Azure's staff from several years ago, gathered for a holiday party. Their genuine smiles and casual embrace spoke of a team that felt like family. Tonight's staff moved around each other like efficient strangers, each focused on their individual metrics rather than a shared mission of hospitality. Leaving Azure, Rhodes felt the weight of every decision that had slowly transformed his flagship restaurant from a dining destination into a profitable but soulless operation. But something told him the elderly guest's story he was destined to hear would reveal even deeper problems than these. The night was still young, and the Monarch had many more stories to tell. After dinner, Rhodes decided to explore the Monarch's public spaces as a regular guest might. The grand staircase leading down from Azure offered a perfect vantage point of the hotel's evening activities. From here, he'd once proudly watched guests flowing through his carefully crafted spaces. Now, each observation added another crack to the facade. The Crown and Scepter bar had filled with business travelers, but the live piano music he'd once insisted upon had been replaced by piped-in playlist, another cost-cutting measure he'd approved, without considering its impact on ambiance. The pianist, Mr. Chen, had performed at the Monarch for 12 years. How many other small touches of personality had been sacrificed on the altar of efficiency? Near the concierge desk, a heated conversation caught his attention. A well-dressed woman was speaking with increasing frustration to the evening concierge, whose name tag read Benjamin. "I don't understand," the guest was saying. "We've been coming here for our anniversary for 6 years. William always arranged everything perfectly. The theatre tickets, the restaurant reservations, the special touches in our room." Benjamin's response made Rhodes's chest tighten. "I apologize, Mrs. Whitman, but William retired 3 months ago. Our new concierge system can help you book tickets through our partner venues." "Partner venues?" The woman's voice cracked. Slightly. "William knew we preferred the intimate theatres, the local places. He knew our tastes, our stories. This isn't what we come here for." As Mrs. Whitman walked away, visibly upset, Rhodes remembered William Foster, the veteran concierge who'd created personal relationships with countless guests. The consulting report had labelled his position inefficient compared to digital booking systems. Another human connection severed, making his way to the business centre, now rebranded as the digital workspace. Rhodes found most stations empty, except for 2 men in suits, having an intense discussion in low voices. "The numbers don't work," the younger man was saying, shuffling through papers. "We're hitting all the efficiency metrics, but guest satisfaction keeps dropping. Corporate's going to start asking questions." The older man, Rhodes recognized. Him as Peter Morrison, the new general manager who'd replaced Richard Harrison, replied with evident frustration. "Keep massaging the data. We can't afford to miss another quarterly target. The Asian Investment Group." They fell silent as Rhodes entered, quickly gathering their papers. The fragment of conversation nagged at him. What Asian Investment Group? And why were they manipulating satisfaction data? Later, in the fitness center, Rhodes overheard more troubling snippets while pretending to focus on his treadmill workout. 2 maintenance workers were discussing recent changes during their evening shift check. "They're cutting corners everywhere," one said, wiping down equipment. "That pipe burst last week. We'd flagged it for replacement 6 months ago. But no, preventive maintenance doesn't show immediate ROI, according to the consultants." His colleague snorted. "Remember the old days? Mr. Harrison would walk the property daily, catch small problems before they became big ones. When's the last time anyone from management did a real inspection?" Back in the lobby, Rhodes noticed other warning signs his executive visits had missed. The fresh flower arrangements, once changed twice daily, looked wilted. The marble floors, while clean, had lost their deep luster. Even the signature scent seemed weaker, as if someone had decided to dilute it. Near the front desk, a young couple was checking in for their honeymoon. Rhodes remembered when such occasions were celebrated with champagne, upgrades, and personal attention. Now the desk agent merely pointed out the digital concierge features and mentioned the hotel's social media hashtag. Deciding to test the waters, Rhodes approached the desk himself. "Excuse me," he said to Melody, who was still on duty. "I was wondering about the hotel's history. Someone mentioned it was originally built in the 1920s. A few years ago, any staff member could have shared fascinating stories about the Monarch's heritage. Jasper had made sure of that, insisting that understanding the hotel's history helped create meaningful connections with guests. Melody's response was telling. "You can find historical information on our website, sir. There's a virtual tour available through the hotel app." Making his way to the second floor, Rhodes found the Heritage Wall, a collection of historical photos and artifacts he'd curated himself, covered by a temporary banner promoting a corporate events package. The message was clear. History and Heritage had taken a back seat to revenue generation. In the quiet corner near the business center, Rhodes overheard another conversation that made him pause. Two members of the sales team were speaking in hushed tones. "The numbers in the quarterly report can't be right," one was saying. "I've checked the actual bookings against what they're reporting to corporate. Something's off." "Keep your voice down," her colleague warned. "Remember what happened to Lisa when she started asking questions?" The mention of Lisa, his former director of sales who'd abruptly resigned 3 months ago, added another piece to the puzzling picture emerging. At the time, he'd accepted the official explanation of personal reasons. Now he wondered what questions she'd been asking. As midnight approached, Rhodes took one final walk through the lobby. The night shift was settling in, the energy of evening giving way to the quiet efficiency of late hours. But even in this relative calm, he could sense an undercurrent of tension. The night manager, caught in a rare moment of candor with a colleague, summed it up unknowingly. "It's like the soul of the place is slipping away, one cost-cutting measure at a time." Back in his room, Rhodes added to his growing document of observations: data manipulation concerns, maintenance issues being hidden, staff fears about questioning practices, unknown Asian investment group interest, historical elements being minimized, suspicious financial reporting discrepancies. Each note represented not just a problem, but a deviation from the principles he'd once considered fundamental to the monarch's identity. But these warning signs, troubling as they were, felt like mere ripples above something deeper and more disturbing. Tomorrow, he would dig deeper into these concerns. But first, he needed to understand more about this mysterious Asian investment group and why the hotel's data was being manipulated to impress them. What he didn't know yet was that the elderly guest's story he was destined to hear would connect these disparate threads into a pattern more troubling than he could imagine. For now, he could only add one final note to his observations. The monarch isn't just losing its standards, it's losing its soul. The next morning, Rhodes woke early, his mind still processing everything he'd observed the previous day. The room's coffee maker produced a mediocre brew, another small compromise that spoke to larger issues. As he sipped the disappointing coffee, dawn painted the Chicago skyline in shades of pink and gold through his window. His plan for the day was to explore the hotel's morning operations, starting with breakfast service. The Monarch's breakfast buffet had once been legendary, worthy of special trips by locals seeking weekend indulgence. As Griffin Parker, he'd experience it from the other side of the serving line, the terrace restaurant, the hotel's all-day dining. The venue was moderately busy when he arrived. A hostess led him to a table without enthusiasm, barely making eye contact. The buffet spread, while extensive, lacked the artisanal touches he remembered. No house-made jams, no freshly pressed juices, no chef preparing made-to-order omelets with local ingredients. "Coffee, sir?" A server appeared at his elbow, already, pouring before he could respond. Her name tag read Isabella, and dark circles under her eyes suggested a long shift. "Busy morning?" Rhodes asked, maintaining Griffin Parker's friendly but unassuming demeanor. Isabella glanced around before answering. "Short-staffed again. Third time this week. Management says it's temporary, but—" She shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its resignation. As Rhodes made his way to the buffet, he overheard fragments of conversations from other guests, complaints about cold eggs, observations about declining quality, reminiscences of better experiences in previous years. But it was what he heard next that made him freeze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. In a quiet corner of the restaurant, an elderly couple sat with a middle-aged man who seemed to be their son. The older gentleman was speaking, his voice carrying the weight of deep emotion. 50 years we've been coming to this hotel. Your mother and I spent our honeymoon here in 1974. The staff back then, they were family. When she got sick last year, you remember what they did?" Rhodes found himself drifting closer, pretending to study the pastry selection. The old manager, Mr. Harrison, he made sure we had the same room we'd always had. The concierge, William, he arranged everything. Medical equipment delivered discreetly. Special meals when she couldn't eat regular food. They cared. The son nodded, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. I remember, Dad. They were incredible during that time. But now, the elderly man's voice cracked slightly. I came back because she made me promise. Don't stop going, she said before the end. Our memories are there. But it's all different. The room they gave me, not our usual one. The staff don't know us anymore, and yesterday I overheard something that broke my heart. Rhodes abandoned all pretense of examining the buffet, finding a seat within earshot. Two managers talking in the hallway. They're selling the hotel. Some foreign companies buying it, planning to tear it down. Luxury condos, they said. All those memories, all that history, just numbers on a spreadsheet to them. The coffee turned bitter in Rhodes's mouth. Selling the hotel, tearing it down. He'd heard nothing about this. The Asian investment group mentioned yesterday. Could this be connected? But surely they can't just... The son began. They're already doing it, the elderly man continued. Piece by piece, cutting staff, changing policies, driving away loyal guests. Makes the numbers look better for the sale, they said. More profitable to tear it down than maintain tradition. Rhodes's mind raced. The declining service standards, the data manipulation, the cost-cutting measures. Were they all part of a deliberate strategy to devalue the hotel's reputation while maximizing short-term profits? Your mother would be heartbroken, the elderly man said softly. She loved this place so much. Remember how she used to talk to the flower lady every morning? Mrs. Chen, with her little cart of fresh arrangements. Now it's all plastic flowers and corporate efficiency. The son leaned forward. Dad, have you tried talking to the current management? A bitter laugh. They directed me to their customer feedback app. 50 years of memories reduced to a satisfaction survey and loyalty points. Rhodes watched as the family finished their breakfast, the elderly man's eyes scanning the restaurant, as if trying to memorize every detail. As they left, he heard one final exchange. I'll make this my last visit, the man said. Better to remember it as it was than watch it disappear piece by piece. Abandoning his barely touched breakfast, Rhodes retreated to a quiet corner of the lobby, his hands shaking slightly as he typed notes into his phone. Hotel being sold secretly, plans for demolition, intentional degradation of service, staff reductions part of larger strategy, long-term guests being pushed out, personal histories being erased. The pieces were starting to fit together. The mysterious Asian investment group, the manipulated data, the systematic dismantling of everything that had made the Monarch special. But who was behind it? And more importantly, how had such a massive decision been made without his knowledge? His phone buzzed. Another message from Ravenna. Board asking questions about property valuations. Asian consortium pushing for updated financial reports. Where are you? Rhodes ignored it, his mind focused on the elderly man's words. How many other loyal guests were watching their memories being systematically erased? How many other stories were being lost in this rush to transform the Monarch from a landmark of hospitality into a real estate transaction? He needed to know more. The morning managers' meeting would be starting soon in the executive offices that Griffin Parker shouldn't know existed. But perhaps a wrong turn on the way to the fitness center might prove enlightening. What he would discover in the next few hours would shake him even more than the elderly man's story. The Monarch wasn't just losing its soul. It was being murdered, piece by calculated piece. The executive floor of the Monarch Hotel wasn't accessible to regular guests, but Rhodes knew every service corridor and back stairwell in the building. As Griffin Parker, he made his way through the staff areas, nodding casually to passing employees. His years of hotel experience made him invisible, Just another business traveler who'd taken a wrong turn. The morning manager's meeting would be happening in conference room C, a daily briefing he'd instituted years ago but hadn't attended in person for far too long. The room's walls were glass, but its audio system had recently been upgraded for video conferences, if he could get close enough. Rhodes positioned himself in an adjacent seating area, hidden behind a decorative pillar. A newspaper and laptop completed his disguise as a guest seeking a quiet workspace. Through the glass, he could see Peter Morrison, the general manager, leading the meeting. The audio system's speakers, poorly installed during the recent renovation, carried fragments of conversation into the hallway. "Satisfaction scores need adjustment before the next report," Morrison was saying. "The consortium's representatives will be here next week. Everything must look perfect." A female voice Rhodes didn't recognize responded, "But the actual numbers." "The actual numbers don't matter," Morrison cut in. "What matters is what we show them. Rodriguez, how's the staff reduction plan progressing?" "Ahead of schedule," a man replied. 3 more departments streamlined this week. We're calling it efficiency optimization to avoid raising concerns." Rhodes's hands clenched around his newspaper. Efficiency optimization, a euphemism for systematically dismantling the hotel's service standards. Good. The lower the operating costs, the better the property looks for liquidation. Morrison's voice turned sharp. "Speaking of which, who? Talk to that old man in the restaurant. He was asking questions about the renovation plans." "Probably heard it from the construction company," someone suggested. "They've been measuring for preliminary demolition surveys." "Keep him happy, but distant," Morrison ordered. "Last thing we need is guests spreading rumors before the deal closes. Corporate's been clear. This stays quiet until everything's finalized." Rhodes had heard enough. Slipping away from his hiding spot, he made his way to the back office area. The service corridors were quieter here, populated only by occasional staff members hurrying between tasks. None of them questioned his presence, another sign of how far the Monarch's security standards had fallen. Near the purchasing office, he overheard another telling conversation. 2 employees were discussing supply orders. "These new vendors are terrible," one complained. "Everything's cheaper quality, but somehow costs more on paper." "That's the point," her colleague replied. "Haven't you noticed? All the new contracts are with subsidiaries of Phoenix Holdings." The name hit Rhodes like a physical blow. Phoenix Holdings, a shell company he'd investigated years ago when they'd tried to acquire one of his smaller properties. They were known for buying historic hotels, stripping them for assets, and redeveloping the properties into luxury condominiums. Finding an empty office, Rhodes pulled out his phone. A quick search revealed what he'd feared. Phoenix Holdings was now a subsidiary of the same Asian investment consortium that had been pressuring the board. His phone buzzed again. Ravenna. This time he answered, keeping his voice low. "What's happening with the board?" "They've called an emergency session for next week," she replied. "Rhodes, something's wrong. They're asking for documents you never approved, claiming you signed off on property valuations that don't exist." "Who's pushing it?" "Morrison and his team. They're presenting some kind of comprehensive development proposal, the Asian Consortium." "Phoenix Holdings," Rhodes interrupted. "They're behind it." A sharp intake of breath. "How did you... Where are you?" "Discovering exactly how deep this goes," he replied. "Don't let them know you've talked to me. I need more time." Ending the call, Rhodes made his way to the accounting office. Years ago, he'd had a private entrance installed, a security measure now working in his favor. Inside, he found what he was looking for: requisition forms for the recent renovations, all authorized by Morrison's team. The pattern was clear in the paperwork. Systematic reductions in quality disguised as upgrades, service cuts masked as efficiency improvements, Guest satisfaction data manipulated to show acceptable numbers while the actual experience deteriorated, all designed to make the property appear simultaneously profitable and underutilized, perfect for redevelopment. A noise in the hallway sent him retreating, but not before he photographed key documents with his phone. Back in the public areas, Rhodes's mind raced with implications. This wasn't just about cost-cutting or mismanagement. This was a calculated conspiracy to devalue the monarch's reputation while maintaining paper profitability, making it ripe for acquisition and demolition. Near the spa entrance, he caught another fragment of conversation between staff members. Moving up the timeline, Morrison says we need to be ready for transition by end of month. End of month, the same time as the board's emergency session. They were planning to present this as a fait accompli, with all the documentation carefully arranged to make it appear both legitimate and inevitable. In the main lobby, Rhodes watched guests flowing through the space. Families making memories, couples celebrating special moments, business travelers calling this place home. None of them knew their historic hotel was being systematically dismantled around them. The elderly man's words from breakfast echoed in his mind. All those memories, all that history, just numbers on a spreadsheet to them. But the numbers weren't adding up. Why go to such elaborate lengths to devalue the property? The monarch's location alone made it valuable. Unless... Rhodes pulled up the city's zoning maps on his phone. The hotel's historic status protected it from major alterations, unless it could be proved that maintaining the property as a hotel was no longer financially viable. A declining reputation, falling service standards, and manipulated financial data would create exactly that proof. His hands shook slightly as he added to his notes. Systematic devaluation plan, Phoenix Holdings connection, falsified documents. Board manipulation, timeline acceleration, zoning law exploitation. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture more disturbing than he'd imagined. But he needed more proof, concrete evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. And somewhere in this building, more stories waited to be uncovered. More long-time guests watching their memories being erased. More loyal employees being pushed out under the guise of efficiency. The next phase of his investigation would have to go deeper. But first, he needed to understand exactly how Morrison and his team had managed to orchestrate this scheme right under his nose. The answer, he suspected, would be found in the one place he'd been avoiding, the executive offices where he normally worked. It was time for Griffin Parker to take another wrong turn. Rhodes knew the executive floor's afternoon schedule by heart. Between 2:00 and 3:30 p.m., Morrison and his team would be conducting their daily property walkthrough, another tradition that had become a hollow formality. It was the perfect window for Griffin Parker to do some exploring. Getting to his own office proved surprisingly easy. The executive assistant's desk sat empty, another victim of efficiency optimization, and the security cameras he'd had installed had been temporarily disabled for maintenance. More evidence of systematic dismantling of the hotel's safeguards. Inside his office, everything looked exactly as he'd left it, yet somehow foreign. Awards and photos seemed to mock him from the walls. Celebrations of excellence now tarnished by what he was discovering. But he wasn't here for nostalgia. Rhodes went straight to the executive terminal, using his emergency access codes to bypass the login screen. What he found made his blood run cold. Dozens of documents had been created or modified in his absence, many bearing his digital signature. Renovation approvals, vendor contracts, property valuations, all authorized without his knowledge. Looking for something specific? The voice from the doorway made Rhodes freeze. He turned to find Isabella, the breakfast server from that morning, standing there. But her stance had changed. Gone was the tired resignation. replaced by alert. Observation. Hotel security, she said, showing a badge, though I'm beginning to think you already knew that. Rhodes's mind raced. He could maintain his cover or... Close the door, he said, using his real voice for the first time in 2 days. Isabella's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Calloway, we've been wondering when you'd show up. We? A few of us who haven't been optimized yet. We've been watching, gathering evidence. She moved to the desk, her movements precise and professional. Morrison's team didn't just change policies, they changed people. Anyone who asked questions disappeared, transferred, laid off, or resigned suddenly. Like Lisa from sales? Isabella nodded. She found discrepancies in the booking records, large blocks of rooms marked as occupied but empty. Perfect for making occupancy rates look good on paper while actually running below capacity. Building the case for redevelopment, Rhodes muttered. Exactly, but Lisa kept copies. Isabella pulled a USB drive from her pocket. We all did. Loyal employees don't just forget years of proper procedures. We knew something was wrong. Rhodes connected the drive to his terminal. Folders of documents appeared. Photos, emails, internal memos. A comprehensive record of the Monarch's systematic dismantling. The construction surveys started 3 months ago, Isabella continued. Secret meetings, unmarked vehicles. We photographed everything, but the real evidence is in the financial records. She pointed to a folder labeled Vendor Contracts. Every new supplier is a shell company. They bill at premium rates but deliver lower quality. The difference gets funneled back through Phoenix Holdings, Rhodes finished, making the hotel look simultaneously profitable and failing. The guests noticed first, Isabella said, especially the long-term ones, like Mr. Whitaker. The elderly gentleman from breakfast. 50 years of visits. He and his wife knew every inch of this place. Mrs. Whitaker used to say the Monarch wasn't just a hotel, it was a keeper of memories. Isabella's voice softened. When she got sick, the old staff treated them like family. Now they're just numbers, Rhodes said, remembering the morning's conversation. A noise in the hallway made them both tense. Isabella moved smoothly to the door, checking the corridor. Morrison's tour is ending early. We need to go. Rhodes quickly copied the files to his secure cloud storage. How many others are in your group? Enough to make a difference if someone would listen. She gave him a meaningful look. We've been waiting for the right person to notice. They slipped out through the service corridor, emerging in different locations to avoid suspicion. Back in the public areas, Rhodes processed what he'd learned. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than he'd imagined, but so was the network of loyal employees working to expose it. His phone vibrated. Another message from Ravenna. Morrison called emergency board meeting for tomorrow, not next week. Says he has your signed approval for major property decisions. What's going on? The timeline had accelerated. Whatever. Morrison and Phoenix Holdings were planning. They were making their move soon. Rhodes needed to act fast, but he also needed to be smart. One wrong move could alert them and destroy the evidence his loyal employees had risked their jobs to gather. In the lobby, he observed Morrison concluding his tour, shaking hands with someone Rhodes recognized, a representative from the Asian consortium. Their conversation seemed animated, confident. They thought their plan was proceeding perfectly. Near the front desk, Mr. Whitaker was checking out, cutting his stay short. The elderly man looked around the lobby one last time, his eyes filled with memories only he could see. A junior staff member processed his departure with mechanical efficiency, never knowing the history they were casually discarding. Rhodes added to his growing file of evidence: falsified occupancy records, shell company connections, financial manipulation trails, unauthorized signatures, employee surveillance documentation, guest experience degradation. The pieces were all there, but something was still missing. The evidence showed how the conspiracy worked, but not why Morrison had turned against the hotel. What had made his general manager betray everything the Monarch stood for? As if in answer to his thoughts, his phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Found something you need to see. Morrison's original contract with Phoenix Holdings. It's worse than we thought." The message confirmed his suspicion. There was more to this story than simple greed. Tomorrow's board meeting wasn't just about the hotel's future. It was about its soul. Rhodes glanced at Mr. Whitaker's retreating form. The elderly man had promised his wife he'd keep coming back, keep their memories alive. Now he was leaving. Another piece of the Monarch's heart walking away, unless someone stopped this. Unless someone fought to preserve not just the building, but the spirit of hospitality it represented. Time was running out. The board meeting was less than 24 hours away. But first, Rhodes needed to see what Isabella had found, the missing piece that would explain how deeply this betrayal really went. The service tunnels beneath the Monarch Hotel were a maze of utility corridors and storage rooms, forgotten by most but known intimately by the staff who kept the hotel running. Rhodes followed Isabella through the labyrinth, their footsteps echoing on concrete floors. This was the hotel's true heart. Not the gleaming lobby above, but these functional spaces where dedication and hard work powered the machinery of hospitality. "We call ourselves the Guardians," Isabella explained as they walked. "Started as just a few of us who noticed things changing, details being ignored. Now we're 28 strong, housekeepers, maintenance workers, kitchen staff. Everyone Morrison thought was too unimportant to watch closely." They reached a heavy door marked Archive Storage. Inside, Rhodes found himself in a makeshift command center. Computer monitors displayed security feeds, file cabinets lined the walls, and a large whiteboard held what looked like a timeline of the hotel's recent changes. 3 people waited inside: Salvador from engineering, Melody from the front desk, and an elderly man Rhodes recognized as Frank Chen, the retired head of housekeeping who now worked part-time in the laundry facility. "Mr. Calloway," Frank said, bowing slightly, "we've been expecting you since you checked in as Mr. Parker." "You knew. You still fold your napkin the same way at breakfast?" Frank smiled. "Some habits don't change. Besides, who else would come to investigate personally instead of sending auditors?" Melody stepped forward, holding a thick file. "What we found goes beyond corporate takeover. This is personal." She spread documents across a table. Morrison's connection to Phoenix Holdings started before he came to the Monarch. The papers told a disturbing story. Peter Morrison had worked for Phoenix Holdings previously, specializing in what they euphemistically called property transition, the systematic devaluation of historic hotels to facilitate their demolition and redevelopment. "He's done this before," Salvador explained, pointing to news clippings. "The ambassador in San Francisco, the royal court in Boston, both historic hotels, both demolished for luxury condos. Morrison was involved in each case, always as the inside man." "But why the Monarch?" Rhodes asked. "Why now?" Isabella pulled up a document on one of the monitors. "Because of this, the city's new preservation laws take effect next month. After that, demolishing historic buildings becomes nearly impossible, no matter the financial arguments. They're racing against the clock. And this is Morrison's contract with Phoenix Holdings," Melody added, displaying another file. "His compensation isn't just money. He gets a percentage of the development rights. The longer he's worked to undermine the hotel, the bigger his stake in what replaces it." Rhodes studied the contract dates. "He's been planning this since before I hired him." "It's worse," Frank said quietly. "Show him the guest records." Melody pulled up another file. "We found a pattern. Long-term guests, people with emotional Connections to the hotel. They've been systematically driven away. Room requests accidentally lost. Special arrangements forgotten. Rates suddenly increased. Like the Whitakers, Rhodes murmured. Exactly. Morrison knows these guests are the hotel's strongest advocates. Their stories, their memories, they give the Monarch power beyond property value. By driving them away, he weakens our case for preservation, Rhodes finished. The strategy was elegant in its cruelty. Eliminate the human element that made the hotel special. Reduce it to mere real estate. Salvador opened a maintenance log. They've been sabotaging the building. 2. Small things, easily fixed but deliberately ignored. Create enough problems and the beyond repair argument becomes believable. But we've been documenting everything, Isabella added. Every lost reservation, every maintenance request ignored, every quality reduction disguised as an upgrade. The Guardians have eyes everywhere. Rhodes moved to the whiteboard, studying the timeline. Tomorrow's board meeting. What do you know about it? Morrison's presenting a comprehensive property assessment, Melody explained. All the documentation, carefully crafted to show the hotel as financially unstable, despite good profits. The perfect scenario for a rescue by Phoenix Holdings. Which explains the Asian consortium, Rhodes said. A legitimate front for the real buyers. Frank stepped forward, his voice heavy with decades of experience. Mr. Calloway, this hotel isn't just a building. It's thousands of stories, millions of memories. My father worked here as a dishwasher in the 1960s. I met my wife in the employee cafeteria. Our guests don't return year after year for luxury amenities. They come back because the Monarch holds pieces of their hearts. Rhodes thought of Mr. Whitaker at breakfast, trying to keep his promise to his late wife. How many other stories, other promises, were woven into the hotel's fabric? Morrison doesn't understand that, Isabella said. To him, it's all spreadsheets and property values. He's never stayed up all night helping a bride with last-minute wedding details, or watched children grow up during annual family vacations, or held an elderly guest's hand while they reminisce about their first date here 50 years ago. The room fell silent, each person lost in their own memories of what the Monarch meant to them. Finally, Salvador spoke up. We've gathered the evidence, but we didn't know what to do with it. Corporate channels are compromised. Morrison has too many allies in senior management. We needed someone with the power to act. And now you're here, Melody added. The question is, what are we going to do about tomorrow's board meeting? Rhodes studied the loyal faces around him, employees who had risked their jobs to protect what the Monarch truly meant. The answer was clear. We're going to remind everyone what this hotel really is, he said. Not just property and profits, but people and promises. Morrison wants to present numbers, we'll present stories. He has documentation, we have truth. It won't be easy, Isabella warned. He's prepared for every financial argument. Then we won't make it about finances, Rhodes replied. The Monarch's value isn't in its balance sheet, it's in its heart. And thanks to you, we can prove that heart is still beating. The Guardians shared determined looks. Tomorrow would decide not just the hotel's fate, but the fate of countless memories and stories yet to be created. The evidence they'd gathered wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about preserving something precious and irreplaceable. But first, they needed to ensure their proof was undeniable. And somewhere in the hotel, one more story waited to be heard. One that would make their case impossible to ignore. Evening had settled over the Monarch, transforming the hotel's grand spaces with shadows and subtle lighting. Rhodes sat in a quiet corner of the Crown and Scepter, appearing to any observer as just another business traveller ending his day with a drink. But his mind was racing, processing everything the Guardians had revealed. Isabella's voice came through. His earpiece, another piece of equipment from the hotel's security office. Morrison's heading to his office. He's alone. The general manager had been unusually active today, holding multiple private meetings in various locations throughout the hotel. The Guardians had tracked his movements, noting everyone he spoke with and everywhere he went. "Something's got him spooked," Melody added from her position at the front desk. "He's been calling board members all afternoon, pushing tomorrow's meeting earlier." Rhodes watched Morrison cross the lobby, his usual confident stride betraying a hint of tension. The man's tablet slipped from under his arm, scattering papers across the marble floor. As he scrambled to collect them, Rhodes caught glimpses of documents, architectural drawings, demolition plans, and something that made his heart stop. A familiar signature at the bottom of a contract. "That's impossible," he muttered. The signature was Jasper's, his old mentor, the man who had taught him everything about true hospitality. But Jasper had passed away 3 years ago. "Did you see something?" Isabella asked through the earpiece. "I need to check something in the archives. Now." The basement archives were the Monarch's memory vault. Decades of records, contracts, and correspondence carefully preserved. Or they should have been. When Rhodes and Isabella arrived, they found clear signs of recent disturbance. "Files have been removed," Isabella noted, examining the gaps in usually meticulous records. Multiple sections from around the time Morrison was hired. Rhodes went straight to the section containing Jasper's papers. The old concierge had left everything to the hotel, his records, his photographs, even his personal diaries documenting 40 years of service. But the crucial files from his final year were missing. "Look at this," Isabella called from another section. She held up a document, a preliminary agreement with Phoenix Holdings, dated 5 years ago. It's got Jasper's signature, but the date. He was already in the hospital then. Rhodes took the paper with trembling hands. Someone forged his signature, but why? Jasper had no authority over property decisions. Unless... Isabella pulled up another file on her tablet. "Remember that preservation law Morrison's trying to beat? The original version had a clause about historical significance. If a property's long-time employees testified to its cultural value, their statements could prevent demolition," Rhodes finished, "and Jasper was the Monarch's longest-serving employee. His testimony would have carried enormous weight. So they created a paper trail showing he supported the redevelopment," Isabella concluded. But they didn't stop there. She led Rhodes to a storage room the Guardians had discovered, filled with boxes of what appeared to be original hotel records. But something was off. Rhodes pulled out a guest ledger from the 1990s, examining it closely. "These are forgeries," he realized. "Perfect copies, but with subtle changes. Guest histories altered, complaint records inserted, maintenance issues exaggerated. They're rewriting the hotel's entire history. Mr. Calloway," Salvador's voice crackled through the earpiece, "you need to see something. Morrison's office. Now." Using his executive access codes, Rhodes and Isabella made their way to the management floor. Through the office window, they could see Morrison inside, agitated, pacing while on the phone. "The timeline's compromised," he was saying. "Someone's asking questions. No, I don't know who. Yes, I've secured the original documents. Everything's prepared for tomorrow, but..." He fell silent, listening to the person on the other end. His face hardened. "I understand. The board won't have a choice once they see the evidence. By this time tomorrow, the Monarch will be officially dying, and no one will be able to save it." Morrison ended the call and opened his safe, removing a thick folder. Rhodes recognized it, the hotel's original incorporation documents, including declarations of historical significance. As they watched, Morrison began feeding pages into a shredder. "He's destroying evidence," Isabella whispered. But something else had caught Rhodes's attention. On Morrison's desk lay a newspaper from 3 years ago, the story of Jasper's death. Next to it sat a letter in Jasper's distinctive handwriting, dated just before he died. Through the window, Rhodes could make out fragments of text. "Cannot allow the monarch to be destroyed. Heritage must be protected. Mr. Calloway will understand when the time comes." "Isabella," Rhodes said quietly, "I need you to get everyone, all the guardians. Meet me in the heritage room in 1 hour and find Mr. Whitaker. He hasn't checked out yet, has he?" "No, he extended his stay another night. Said something about one last goodbye. Get him too. I think I finally understand what's really happening here." As they watched, Morrison finished destroying documents and placed the ashes in his wastebasket. But his expression wasn't triumphant. It was haunted, almost desperate. "This isn't just about money," Rhodes realized. "Morrison's not just destroying the hotel's history, he's erasing something specific, something in those records that someone doesn't want found." "What?" "I don't know yet, but Jasper did. That's why they needed his signature discredited. That's why they're systematically driving away everyone who remembers the hotel's past. They're not just killing the monarch, they're burying its secrets." The pieces were falling into place, revealing a conspiracy far deeper than simple property development. Tomorrow's board meeting wasn't just about the hotel's future, it was about its past, and someone was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to ensure that past stayed buried. But first, Rhodes needed to hear one final story. Something told him Mr. Whitaker knew more than he'd revealed at breakfast. Something about his wife's last visit, about why the monarch meant so much to them. The truth was hidden somewhere in 50 years of memories, waiting to be uncovered, and time was running out. The heritage room was silent, save for the gentle hum of climate control, protecting the monarch's displayed artifacts. Rhodes stood before a wall of photographs, studying an image of the hotel's opening day in 1974. Young Jasper stood proudly in his concierge uniform, while beside him. "That's my wife," Mr. Whitaker said softly, joining Rhodes at the display. "Margaret. She was a guest relations coordinator back then." He touched the glass gently. "She always said the monarch was more than a hotel. It was a keeper of secrets." The guardians gathered quietly around them. Isabella, Salvador, Melody, Frank, and 24 others. Each face showed the same mixture of determination and concern. They all knew tomorrow's board meeting could be their last day at the Monarch. Rhodes's phone buzzed. "Ravenna again. Emergency. Morrison's presentation includes evidence of financial misconduct. Board demanding your immediate return." As he read the message, another figure slipped into the room. Claire Anderson, his longtime executive assistant. Her presence made him pause. He hadn't included her in his undercover plans, hadn't told anyone except Ravenna. "I'm sorry, Rhodes," Claire said, her voice heavy with emotion. "But this has to end." The doors opened again. Peter Morrison entered, followed by 2 security guards, not hotel staff, but private contractors. Behind them came the last person Rhodes expected to see. "Ravenna?" His VP of operations wouldn't meet his eyes. "It's over, Rhodes. We know you've been here investigating, but you don't understand what's really happening." Morrison stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Mr. Calloway, your presence at tomorrow's board meeting won't be necessary. We have documentation of your involvement in years of financial irregularities, unless you want that information made public." "It was you," Rhodes said to Ravenna, the truth finally dawning. "You've been helping them all along. Every time I was away, every decision delayed, every document that needed my signature." "You weren't listening," she replied. "The market's changing. Luxury hotels are dying. I tried to tell you, tried to make you see we needed to adapt, but you were too focused on tradition, on maintaining Jasper's outdated ideals. So you decided to destroy everything we built?" "We decided to survive," Claire interjected. Phoenix. Holdings approached us 2 years ago. They showed us the numbers, the projections. Hotels like the Monarch can't compete with modern properties, but a luxury residential development. Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Your signature is on everything, Rhodes. Every questionable transaction, every irregular payment. If this goes public, you'll be finished in the industry. Sign over your voting rights to Ravenna, let the board approve the sale quietly, and you can walk away with a generous settlement. Rhodes looked around the room, at the photographs documenting decades of memories, at the loyal staff who had risked everything to protect those memories, at Mr. Whitaker still touching his wife's image in the old photograph. "Show him," Morrison commanded. Ravenna opened a file on her tablet. There it was, years of suspicious transactions, all bearing Rhodes's signature. Account transfers, vendor payments, cash movements that looked undeniably questionable out of context. The Anderson account, Rhodes breathed. The emergency fund he'd maintained for special guest situations, for making things right when official channels were too slow. Out of context, it looked like a slush fund for illegal payments. "Did you really think we wouldn't find it?" Morrison's voice held a note of triumph. "Every payment, every special arrangement, every rule bent for a guest's comfort, all documented. The board will have no choice but to remove you once this evidence is presented. Unless—" Ravenna's voice softened slightly. "Unless you cooperate, help us transition the property smoothly. Your reputation stays intact, and the Monarch becomes something new, something sustainable." Rhodes turned to Mr. Whitaker. "You said Margaret knew the hotel's secrets. What did you mean?" Morrison stepped forward sharply. "That's not relevant. She knew everything," the elderly man said quietly. "Every story, every secret moment. She kept her own records, separate from the official files. Said someday they might be needed to protect the Monarch's soul." "Records?" Claire's voice sharpened. "What records?" Mr. Whitaker smiled sadly. "Why do you think she insisted on coming back, even when she was so ill? One last visit, she said. One last chance to make things right." The last visit, Rhodes remembered, when the staff, the old staff, helped arrange everything she needed, when William the concierge personally handled all the arrangements. Understanding dawned. William's sudden retirement, Lisa from sales' abrupt departure, the missing archives, everyone who might have known what Margaret Whitaker did during her final stay had been systematically removed. "It's not about the property value at all, is it?" Rhodes said to Morrison. "This isn't about development rights or profit margins. You're looking for something in Margaret's records that could destroy everything you've planned." Morrison's confident facade cracked slightly. "You have no idea what's really at stake. The Monarch holds secrets that would—" He caught himself. "It doesn't matter. By this time tomorrow the board will vote to sell, and then we'll tear this place down to its foundations if we have to." "Not if those secrets come out first," Isabella said, stepping forward. She held up her phone, showing a video feed. "Everything you just said was streamed live to every employee break room, every staff area. The Guardians aren't the only ones who care about the truth." Morrison's face contorted with rage. He gestured to his security guards. "Remove them, all of them, and find whatever records that old woman left behind." But hotel staff were quietly filling the doorway. Housekeepers, maintenance workers, kitchen staff. Decades of loyalty standing together. "One last thing," Rhodes said softly. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize a forged signature? Especially Jasper's?" He pulled out his phone, displaying a message from a forensic document expert. "The real documents, the ones you've been destroying. I had copies made years ago," Jasper insisted. "Always keep a record," he said, "because someday someone might try to rewrite history." The heritage room had become very quiet. In the silence, Mr. Whitaker spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of 50 years of memories. Margaret always said the truth would come out when it needed to. Looks like she was right. Now the real battle for the monarch's soul could begin. Time seemed to freeze in the heritage room as the two sides faced each other. Morrison and his allies on one side, the unified hotel staff on the other. Rhodes stood between them, no longer pretending to be Griffin Parker, but not quite the CEO either. In this moment, he was simply someone fighting for something precious. "You really think these service workers can stop what's coming?" Morrison sneered, but his eyes darted nervously between faces. "The board meets in 12 hours. The votes are already secured." "Are they?" Isabella stepped forward, phone still recording. "Because I think the board might be interested in seeing this." She played a clip from earlier, Morrison's admission, about destroying documents, about tearing down the hotel to find whatever he was looking for. "And there's more," Salvador added. "Every maintenance record you falsified, every safety inspection you rushed through. What happens when the building department sees those?" Morrison's confident facade cracked further. "You don't understand. None of you understand what's buried here. Some secrets need to stay buried. Like whatever happened in 1974. Mr. Whitaker's quiet voice cut through the tension. "The real reason you're so desperate to find Margaret's records?" The color drained from Morrison's face. Ravenna and Claire exchanged worried glances. "How much do you know?" Morrison demanded. "Margaret knew everything," the elderly man replied. "Every secret disclosed in confidence, every story entrusted to her care. She protected them all, but she also protected the hotel. Insurance, she called it." Rhodes watched the interplay carefully, something in Morrison's reaction, in the way Ravenna suddenly wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "The original permits," he said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "The ones that established the monarch. They weren't just about building codes, were they?" Mr. Whitaker smiled sadly. "This land wasn't always meant for a hotel. The original plans, the real reason certain powerful people wanted it developed." He shook his head. Margaret knew. She kept proof, just in case someone ever tried to erase the monarch's true history. "Enough!" Morrison's composure shattered completely. "Those records don't exist. We've searched everywhere, torn apart archives, interviewed former employees, monitored every conversation in this building for months. Your wife's delusions were anything but delusions," Rhodes interrupted. He turned to the Guardians. "Isabella, remember what you said about William, the old concierge? His sudden retirement after Mrs. Whitaker's last stay." Isabella's eyes widened. "He helped arrange everything for her final visit, including moving her from room to room," Melody finished, "against protocol, against medical advice. Everyone thought she was just nostalgic, wanting to revisit old memories. She was hiding something," Rhodes realized, "right under everyone's noses, using the one thing Morrison and his team would never understand. The human element of hospitality." Mr. Whitaker straightened his shoulders. "The night before she left us, Margaret made me promise. When the time comes," she said, "when someone truly worthy needs to know, the monarch itself will reveal its secrets." Morrison gestured sharply to his security guards. "Search everything, every room she stayed in during that last visit. Tear out the walls if you have to. You won't find anything," Mr. Whitaker said calmly. "Margaret was smarter than that. She knew someday someone would come looking, someone who'd forgotten that a hotel is more than just property and profits." Rhodes felt the weight of decades of history pressing down on him. Not just the monarch's history, but the personal histories of thousands of guests and employees. Each room held countless stories. Each corner harbored intimate moments. Somewhere in this building, Margaret Whitaker had hidden the truth about its origins, trusting that the right person would eventually understand where to look. "The board meeting is in 12 hours, Ravenna said, her voice strained. Even with this recording, they'll still vote to sell. The financial evidence against you is too strong. Unless we find what Mrs. Whittaker hid, Rhodes countered. The truth about why Phoenix Holdings is so desperate to tear down this building, why they spent years infiltrating and undermining it instead of simply making an offer. He turned to the assembled staff, the guardians and all the others who had come to stand with them. You know this hotel better than anyone. Every room, every service corridor, every hidden corner. Margaret Whittaker spent her last days here, moving from room to room, not randomly but with purpose. We mapped her movements, Isabella said, pulling up records on her tablet. Thought it was strange at the time. The pattern made no sense for someone just revisiting memories. Because she was leaving a trail, Rhodes realized, one that only someone who truly understood the Monarch would recognize. Morrison's phone buzzed. His face hardened as he read the message. The board chairman is calling an emergency session. Now. Not tomorrow. Tonight. In 3 hours? Why the rush? Claire asked, fear creeping into her voice. Because they know we're close, Rhodes answered. They can't risk us finding whatever Margaret hid. Mr. Whittaker, you said she believed the hotel itself would reveal its secrets to someone worthy. What did she mean? The elderly man looked around the heritage room, his eyes lingering on each historical photo. She always said the Monarch was alive in its own way, that it remembered everything that happened within its walls, and that, when the time was right... He stopped, his attention caught by something in one of the oldest photographs. Rhodes, he said softly, how much do you remember about the original layout, before the last renovation? Everything, Rhodes replied. Jasper made me memorize every detail, said I needed to understand where we came from, to know where we were going. Mr. Whittaker nodded slowly. Then you might be exactly who Margaret was waiting for. But we need to hurry. There's something you need to see, something that will explain everything. The race against time had begun. 3 hours to unlock decades-old secrets, to unravel a conspiracy that went far beyond real estate, and to save not just a hotel, but the truth it had guarded for nearly 50 years. Morrison and his security team moved to block the door, but they were outnumbered by determined hotel staff. The Monarch's family had come together to protect its heart. You have 3 hours, Morrison spat. Then the board votes, and none of this will matter. Rhodes looked at the loyal faces around him, the guardians, the staff, Mr. Whittaker with his half-century of memories. Together, they had one last chance to prove that some things were worth more than profit margins and property values. The final chapter of the Monarch's story was about to be written. The Monarch's original blueprints lay spread across a table in the heritage room, their edges yellowed with age. Mr. Whittaker traced a trembling finger along faded lines, while Rhodes and the guardians gathered around. Margaret's last stay, the elderly man said. 6 days, 6 different rooms. Everyone thought she was being sentimental, but look at the pattern. Isabella overlaid a diagram of Mrs. Whittaker's room changes. Room 512, then 647, then 823, 314, 906, and finally the presidential suite where... She paused delicately. Where she spent her last night, Mr. Whittaker finished softly, but more importantly, where she asked to see the original hotel documents, the ones kept in the suite safe. Rhodes studied the room sequence. Something about it nagged at his memory. These rooms, they're all from different eras of the hotel. 512 was part of the original building. 647 came with the East Wing expansion in 82. 823 during the renovation of 95. Each room representing a different chapter of the Monarch's history, Mr. Whittaker nodded. Margaret wasn't just moving randomly. She was following the hotel's evolution. But why? Melody asked, marking the rooms on a current floor plan. Before anyone could answer, Salvador burst into the room. Morrison's team is searching the presidential suite. They're tearing it apart. Let them, Rhodes said, his eyes fixed on the blueprints. They're looking in the wrong place. Mrs. Whittaker wouldn't hide something important where they'd expect to find it. He turned to Mr. Whittaker. You said she believed the hotel would reveal its secrets to someone worthy, someone who understood that a hotel is more than just a building. What was the one thing she valued most about the Monarch? The elderly man's eyes lit up with understanding. The stories. She always said every guest brought a story, added their own chapter to the hotel's history. And where would those stories be recorded? Rhodes pressed. Not in the official files, not in the corporate records, but in the daily life of the hotel itself. Isabella gasped. The guest books. Each room had one. Leather-bound journals where guests could leave messages, share experiences. It was a Monarch tradition until Morrison discontinued it last year, Melody finished. Said it was outdated, inefficient. Replaced them all with digital feedback tablets. Rhodes straightened. Where are the old guest books now? Storage room B, with the other obsolete items, Frank answered. I helped box them up myself. Thousands of books going back decades. Not thousands, Mr. Whittaker corrected. Margaret knew which ones mattered. The 6 rooms she stayed in, those books would tell the real story. The story Phoenix Holdings is so desperate to bury. They moved quickly through the service corridors, avoiding Morrison's security teams. Storage room B was deep in the hotel's basement, a vast space filled with the physical history Morrison's modernization had discarded. Here, Salvador called, pulling out a box labeled Guest Records, Historical. Inside lay 6 leather-bound books, each marked with a room number matching Margaret's final journey through the hotel. Rhodes opened the book from room 512. Decades of guest messages filled its pages, celebrations, proposals, anniversaries. But between the entries, in different inks but the same elegant handwriting, he found something else. She added her own. Notes, he breathed, scattered throughout the books, hidden among genuine guest entries, dates, names, details. His voice caught. The true story of how the Monarch came to be. The truth emerged piece by piece, scattered across 6 books and 50 years of history. The land where the Monarch stood had originally been marked for a very different purpose, a development project tied to corruption at the highest levels of city government. Evidence of bribes, secret deals, and darker crimes had been buried in the foundations. That's why they need the building destroyed, Rhodes realized. The original construction records, the real property deals, it's all still here, hidden in the structure itself. Margaret found proof during the initial construction. Instead of exposing it, she protected it, Mr. Whittaker said proudly, used it to ensure the hotel would be built instead. Created a place of genuine hospitality and human connection, turning something born of corruption into a force for good. But she knew someday someone might try to erase that history, Isabella added, photographing pages with trembling hands. So she left a trail, the guest books, the room sequence. It all tells the story, the real story. Rhodes checked his watch. The board meets in 40 minutes. Morrison's probably already presenting his evidence, painting me as the corrupt one. Then let's show them some real evidence, Melody said firmly. She held up her phone. The Guardians have been broadcasting everything we've found. Every employee in the hotel knows the truth now, and they're not staying quiet. Through the basement walls, they could hear it, hundreds of feet moving above them. Hotel staff, past and present, gathering in the grand ballroom where the board meeting would be held, each one carrying a piece of the Monarch's history, ready to stand against those who would destroy it. Margaret believed in the power of stories. Mr. Whittaker said, clutching one of the guest books to his chest. She knew that someday, when the hotel faced its darkest hour, those stories would be its salvation. Rhodes looked at the loyal faces around him, the guardians who had never lost faith, the staff who understood that hospitality was about heart, not just profit. In trying to erase the hotel's history, Morrison and his conspirators had awakened its very soul. "Let's go," he said, gathering the precious books. "It's time to remind everyone what the Monarch really stands for." As they made their way upward, Rhodes thought of Jasper, of Margaret, of all those who had helped build something truly special. Morrison had been right about one thing. Some secrets needed to stay buried, but others needed to come to light, to remind the world that some places were worth fighting for. The final battle for the Monarch's soul was about to begin, and this time they had something more powerful than financial records and corporate strategies. They had the truth. The Monarch's grand ballroom had witnessed countless pivotal moments over the years, society weddings, historic peace accords, celebrations that had become part of Chicago legend. But nothing quite like this. The emergency board meeting had been set up on the main stage, 12 stern-faced board members seated behind a long table. Morrison stood before them, his presentation on the massive screens behind him showing damning financial charts and doctored evidence of mismanagement. But he'd lost control of his audience. The ballroom doors had been thrown open and hotel staff poured in by the dozens. Current employees, retired veterans, even former guests who'd heard what was happening and rushed to support their beloved Monarch. They lined the walls, filled the chairs, stood shoulder to shoulder in silent witness. "This is irregular," Board Chairman Victor Chen protested, as Rhodes strode down the center aisle, the guardians and Mr. Whittaker beside him. "This meeting is closed, like the meetings where you approved selling the Monarch to Phoenix Holdings," Rhodes interrupted, his voice carrying to every corner, "or the ones where you accepted Morrison's manipulated evidence without question." Morrison stepped forward, maintaining his corporate smile. "Mr. Calloway, we've already established your ethical lapses. The board has seen the financial records." "Forgeries," Isabella called out, holding up her phone. The screens behind Morrison flickered, his presentation replaced by security footage of him destroying documents in his office. "Just like the guest satisfaction surveys you manipulated, the maintenance records you falsified, and the employee testimonials you fabricated." "And what about the real documents?" Rhodes asked quietly. "The ones that show why Phoenix Holdings is so desperate to tear down this building, the truth Margaret Whittaker protected for 50 years?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Morrison's smile cracked slightly. "Delusions, the ramblings of a sentimental old woman. My wife was many things." Mr. Whittaker stepped forward, his voice strong with dignity. "But delusional was never one of them. She knew exactly what she was protecting and why." He opened one of the recovered guest books, his hands steady now. June 15th, 1974. The day construction began on the Monarch. Margaret was there, working. As a junior coordinator, she saw the original permits, the real ownership documents, the names of everyone involved in the land deal that was supposed to destroy this neighborhood. "Ancient history," Morrison snapped. "Irrelevant to—" "Relevant. To the 3 city council members who went to prison," Mr. Whittaker continued. "To the corruption investigation that was suddenly dropped. To the evidence that was supposed to be buried in the foundation. Evidence Margaret found and protected. Evidence that's still here, hidden in the very walls Phoenix Holdings is so eager to tear down." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Chairman Chen's face had gone pale. "That's why it had to be demolition, wasn't it?" Rhodes pressed. Not renovation, not remodeling. The building had to come down completely because somewhere in its structure, Margaret Whittaker hid proof of who really owned this land, who paid for their silence, who— "Enough!" Morrison shouted. He turned to the security guards. "Clear the room, now!" But the guards didn't move. One by one, they removed their badges and stood with the hotel staff. "You forgot something crucial," Rhodes said softly. "Something Margaret understood, something Jasper taught me, something you never learned. A hotel isn't just a building. It's not just assets and inventory. It's people, stories, lives interconnected across decades." The screens changed again, showing photographs from the Monarch's history, staff celebrations, guest milestones, moments of genuine connection and care that defined true hospitality. "Every person in this room has a story about the Monarch," Rhodes continued. "Every guest book entry, every employee memory, every celebration. And comfort and kindness, they're all part of something greater, something worth protecting." He turned to the board. "You've seen Morrison's manufactured evidence. Now look at the real numbers." Isabella transmitted new data to the screens. True financial records, guest satisfaction trends, community impact studies. The Monarch isn't failing. It's not outdated. It's living proof that success can come from serving others, not just serving profits. "The development rights alone," Morrison began, "mean nothing compared to the lives we touch." Rhodes cut him off. "Ask Antonio in maintenance, whose daughter's college education was funded by our employee scholarship program. Ask Sarah at the front desk, who met her husband when he was a guest, recovering from cancer treatment. Ask Mr. Whittaker, whose wife spent 50 years turning dark secrets into a legacy of light." He placed the guest books on the board's table. "Everything is here. Every detail Morrison tried to bury, every truth Phoenix Holdings wanted hidden. Margaret Whittaker left it all in plain sight, protected by the one thing conspirators and corporations never understand, the human heart of hospitality." Chairman Chen opened one of the books with trembling hands. His eyes widened as he read. "These names, these dates, show exactly who was behind the original land deal." Mr. Whittaker nodded. "And who stands to lose everything if that evidence comes to light? My wife believed in justice, but she believed in redemption more. She turned this hotel into something good, something worthy. And now you have to decide, will you honor that legacy or destroy it?" The ballroom had fallen completely silent. Hundreds of witnesses waited for the board's response. Morrison stood frozen, his carefully constructed plans crumbling around him. Chairman Chen looked at his fellow board members, then at the assembled staff, the heart and soul of the Monarch Hotel. His decision would affect not just a property, but countless lives and stories yet to be written. The moment of truth had arrived. Chairman Chen closed the guest book with hands that had steadied, his expression transforming from shock to something harder. "Get me the state's attorney's office," he ordered his assistant. "And the FBI, they'll want to see this." Morrison's corporate facade finally shattered completely. He lunged for the guest books, but a wall of hotel staff moved to protect them. In the chaos, Ravenna tried to slip away through a service entrance, only to find Isabella and a dozen housekeepers blocking her path. "Your resignation letter's already drafted," Rhodes told his former VP of operations. "Sign it, cooperate with the authorities, and maybe you won't face criminal charges." "You don't understand," Ravenna protested, her voice desperate. "Phoenix Holdings, they'll bury anyone who exposes this. They have people everywhere, influence you can't imagine." "Had influence," corrected a new voice. Everyone turned to see District Attorney Catherine Martinez stride into the ballroom, flanked by federal agents. "We've been building a case against Phoenix Holdings for months. Just needed concrete evidence of their methods." She smiled grimly at Morrison. "A corporate raid caught on hundreds of live streaming phones. Documented evidence of historical corruption. Witnessed testimony from long-term employees. Christmas came early for my office. Morrison's shoulders slumped in defeat. As agents led him away, he turned to Rhodes one last time. "The old ways are dying," he said. "Traditional hospitality can't survive in today's market. You're only delaying the inevitable." "No," Rhodes replied firmly. "We're preserving something timeless. The market doesn't dictate human connection. Numbers can't measure the value of a memory." The board members had huddled together, whispering urgently as they reviewed the evidence in the guest books. Finally, Chairman Chen stood. "The vote to sell the Monarch Hotel is permanently withdrawn," he announced. "Furthermore, this board will cooperate fully with the investigation into Phoenix Holdings and their attempts to acquire this property through fraudulent means." A cheer went up from the assembled staff, but Chen wasn't finished. "Mr. Calloway, your dedication to this institution, even to the point of going undercover to protect it, demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership the Monarch needs. The board unanimously reaffirms your position as CEO with expanded authority to implement your vision for the hotel's future." Rhodes shook his head. "Thank you, but my first act would be to dissolve this board entirely." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The Monarch needs guidance from people who understand hospitality, not just business. He gestured to the guardians. "Isabella, Salvador, Melody, Frank, you'll form the core of a new advisory council. People who know this hotel's heart, who understand its true value. The board can handle corporate governance, but the soul of the Monarch will be guided by those who love it most." Mr. Whitaker stepped forward, tears in his eyes. Margaret would be proud. This was her dream, the hotel protected not by power or money, but by the strength of its own community. As federal agents conducted interviews and collected evidence, the impromptu gathering transformed into something else, a celebration of the Monarch's legacy and future. Staff members shared stories, guests recalled special moments, and the hotel's true history emerged from the shadows. In a quiet corner, Rhodes found Chairman Chen studying an old photograph of the hotel's groundbreaking ceremony. "You knew, didn't you?" Rhodes asked. "About the original land deal?" Chen nodded slowly. "My father was one of the honest developers who got pushed out when he wouldn't participate in the corruption. He always suspected, but by the time the Monarch was built, it had become something different, something better." "Thanks to Margaret Whitaker," Rhodes said. "And now thanks to you." Chen handed him a formal document. "The board's last act, establishing a historical preservation trust. The Monarch can never be demolished or sold without unanimous approval from both the board and your new advisory council." Rhodes watched his employees, his family, celebrating their victory. Isabella was already planning improvements to security protocols. Salvador had cornered the district attorney to discuss modernization that wouldn't compromise the hotel's character. Melody was comforting newer staff members shaken by the day's events, showing the same empathy that had made her an excellent front desk agent. Mr. Whitaker sat in Margaret's favorite lobby chair, surrounded by young employees eager to hear stories of the hotel's early days. The guest books lay protected nearby, their pages containing not just evidence of past corruption, but countless moments of human connection. "We'll need to make changes," Rhodes acknowledged. "Update systems, improve efficiency, adapt to modern expectations. But we'll do it the right way, preserving what matters while building something even better." "And the Anderson account?" Chen asked with a slight smile. "That secret fund for helping guests in need will be formalized as the Margaret Whitaker Memorial Fund," Rhodes declared. "Properly audited, completely transparent, but still dedicated to adding that personal touch she valued so much." His phone buzzed. The first press inquiries were coming in, along with messages from other historic hotels facing similar corporate raiders. The Monarch story was spreading, becoming a symbol of resistance against soulless modernization. But that could wait. Right now, Rhodes had a hotel to run. Not from an executive office, but from the heart of the action. There were guests to greet, staff to support, and new memories to help create. In the end, Margaret Whittaker's greatest legacy wasn't the evidence she preserved or the corruption she prevented. It was the reminder that true hospitality was built on human connections, one story at a time. The Monarch Hotel stood tall against the Chicago skyline, its lights burning bright against the gathering. Dusk. Within its walls, a half-century of memories were safe, and new chapters waited to be written. Dawn broke over the Monarch Hotel the next morning, painting its windows with golden light. Rhodes stood in the lobby, watching his first guests of the day arrive, no longer disguised as Griffin Parker, but not quite the same CEO who had left his executive office just days ago. "Welcome to the Monarch," he heard Melody greet an arriving family. But instead of directing them to the digital check-in kiosks, she engaged them personally, learning it was their first visit to Chicago. Within minutes, she had arranged for a local guide, made dinner reservations at a family-friendly restaurant, and created the foundation for another lasting memory. "Just like old times," Isabella said, joining Rhodes at his observation point. She traded her housekeeping uniform for a more professional outfit, befitting her new role as head of guest relations. Except better. The changes had begun immediately. After the dramatic board meeting, the first order of business, reinstating the personal touches that Morrison had stripped away. The digital concierge tablets remained, but now as tools to enhance service rather than replace human interaction. "Mr. Calloway," Salvador approached, tablet in hand. The engineering team found something during the maintenance review. He pulled up blueprints of the hotel's original construction. Remember those structural irregularities Morrison was so interested in? Turns out they're hollow spaces, perfect for hiding documents. We've already found 3 caches of Margaret's evidence. Rhodes smiled. She didn't just leave breadcrumbs in the guest books. She made sure the truth was literally built into the hotel's foundations. "Speaking of foundations," Frank joined them, "wait until you see what we found in the old storage rooms. Guest logs going back to opening day, photos, letters, mementos guests left behind. Morrison's team missed them completely. They were too focused on digital records." The lobby had come alive with activity. The morning pianist, rehired, overnight filled the space with gentle music. Fresh flowers, locally sourced, replaced the artificial arrangements. The signature scent wafted subtly through the air, no longer diluted by cost-cutting measures. "Did you see this?" Isabella handed Rhodes a stack of letters. Started arriving. At dawn, former guests who heard about yesterday's events. They're sharing their Monarch memories, asking when they can return. Rhodes read snippets of heartfelt messages. "Our daughter was born during a snowstorm while staying at the Monarch. The staff turned our crisis into a beautiful story. Mere 25 years of wedding anniversaries celebrated in room 512. When I lost my job in 2008, the hotel discreetly reduced my regular business stay rates until I got back on my feet." "And this one," Isabella said softly, holding up a particular envelope from Mr. Whittaker. The elderly man had written pages, sharing not just his and Margaret's story, but dozens of others they'd witnessed over their 50 years at the Monarch. He ended with a simple request. "Don't just preserve the hotel. Preserve its spirit of caring for each guest as family." The new advisory council had their first meeting scheduled for afternoon, not in a corporate boardroom, but in the heritage room, surrounded by the history they were pledged to protect. The agenda was ambitious. Restore traditional service standards while maintaining modern efficiency. Create training programs to pass down institutional knowledge. Establish the Margaret Whittaker Memorial Fund properly. Develop ways to preserve and share guest stories, modernize facilities without losing character, build stronger connections with the local community. The press is arriving, Melody reported. They want the full story. The undercover boss, the corporate raid, the historic evidence. CNN's calling it the hotel that fought back. Rhodes watched a young couple enter, clearly honeymooners by their body language. The staff response was immediate and organic. Subtle signals passed between departments, small preparations begun. Within moments, their ordinary check-in would become something memorable. "Let them wait," he said regarding the press. "Right now, we have guests to take care of." Near the front desk, he spotted a familiar face. Claire, his former assistant, who had helped Morrison's scheme. She stood awkwardly, carrying a box of personal items. "I was clearing out my office," she said when he approached. "I know I don't have a place here anymore, but I wanted to apologize. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what made this place special." Rhodes considered her words. "Everyone deserves a chance at redemption. That's what Margaret believed." He gestured to the heritage room. "We need someone to help organize the archives, preserve the stories we're rediscovering. Someone who understands both the old ways and the new." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "You mean, report to Frank tomorrow. You can help us protect the monarch's history, the right way this time." Throughout the morning, more changes unfolded. William, the retired concierge, called to offer part-time mentoring for new staff. Local vendors, hearing of Morrison's departure, reached out to renew their traditional partnerships. The hotel's social media, filled with Sandra's Monarch memories as guests, shared their stories. In the kitchen, Chef Marcus had already restored the original breakfast buffet recipes. The maintenance team began addressing the backlog of minor repairs Morrison had deemed inefficient. Every department found its rhythm again, balancing modern needs with timeless hospitality. "Look who's back," Isabella called softly. Rhodes turned to see Mr. Whittaker entering the lobby, but not alone. He was leading a group of elderly guests, long-time Monarch regulars who had drifted away during Morrison's tenure. "The family's returning home," the old man said simply. The Monarch Hotel stood ready to welcome them, its soul intact, its future secure, not just as a luxury property or a historic landmark, but as a living testament to the power of genuine hospitality. Margaret's legacy was safe, and new stories waited to be written. 1 month after the dramatic confrontation in the ballroom, the Monarch Hotel was experiencing a renaissance. Rhodes stood in his favorite observation spot, a quiet corner of the mezzanine overlooking the lobby, watching the morning unfold. But this time, he wasn't alone. "Hard to believe how much has changed," Mr. Whittaker said, settling into one of the carefully restored original armchairs. "Margaret would have loved seeing this." The transformation was evident everywhere you looked. The heritage wall, once hidden behind corporate banners, now stretched prominently along the grand staircase. But it wasn't just displaying old photos anymore. New digital frames had been integrated among the traditional ones, showing a rotating collection of guest stories and memories, bridging past and present. "Mr. Calloway," Isabella approached with her morning report. As head of guest relations, she'd instituted a daily briefing system that focused on people, not just numbers. "The Johnson family checked out this morning. Their daughter left this." She handed him a crayon drawing of the hotel, complete with a rainbow and the words, "Best place ever." It would join the growing collection in the newly created memory gallery, a space where guests could share their Monarch moments. "Also," Isabella continued, "the culinary apprenticeship program launches today. Chef Marcus has 20 local students starting their training, and the Margaret Whittaker Memorial Fund just approved its first major project." Rhodes nodded, knowing what was coming. The fund, now properly established and transparent, had chosen a fitting first initiative: providing hospitality training and job opportunities for disadvantaged youth, continuing Margaret's legacy of turning something born of corruption into a force for good. The morning light streamed through restored stained glass windows, creating patterns across the marble floors. Salvador had discovered the original panels stored in the basement, victims of Morrison's modernization. Now they told the hotel's story in colored light, each piece carefully reinstalled by artisans who appreciated their history. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted. A middle-aged woman approached, looking uncertain. "I heard about what happened here, about the hotel fighting back against corporate takeover. I used to stay here with my parents as a child, and I wondered if we still had the guest books." Mr. Whitaker finished gently. "Come with me." He led her to the heritage room, where Claire had organized a remarkable system. The rescued guest books were preserved behind glass, but their contents had been digitized. Visitors could search by date, room number, or name, finding connections to their own Monarch memories. "June 1985, the woman breathed, looking at a projected page. "That's my mother's handwriting. She wrote about my 10th birthday party in the Crystal Room." Throughout the hotel, similar scenes played out daily. The Monarch wasn't just preserving its past, it was actively connecting it to the present. Each department had found ways to blend tradition with innovation. The concierge desk, once nearly replaced by apps, now used technology to enhance personal service. William, coming out of retirement to train new staff, showed them how to use digital tools while maintaining the human touch that made recommendations special. The rooms themselves were being thoughtfully updated. Modern amenities took their place alongside classic touches. The tablets remained, but now they included options to learn about the room's history, read past guest stories, and connect with staff who could make each stay memorable. "Look who's here," Isabella called softly. Through the front doors came a familiar face, Richard Harrison, the former general manager who had retired rather than implement Morrison's changes. He walked slowly, taking in the restored lobby. "Welcome home," Rhodes greeted him. "We could use your expertise on the advisory council." Harrison's eyes were moist. "You've brought it back, not just the appearance, but the spirit." The spirit was indeed everywhere. In the kitchen, Chef Marcus worked with his apprentices, teaching not just cooking techniques, but the art of creating memorable experiences through food. In the maintenance department, Salvador had instituted a mentorship program, ensuring crucial institutional knowledge wouldn't be lost again. Even the technology had been reimagined. The efficiency systems Morrison installed remained, but now they served the staff instead of replacing them. Melody had worked with IT to create a guest preference database that helped anticipate needs while leaving room for personal connection. "Did you see today's numbers?" Isabella asked quietly. Rhodes smiled. "I didn't need to. I can see the results right here." He gestured to the lobby, where every interaction told the story of the Monarch's revival. A bellhop spending extra time with an elderly guest, learning about her first visit in 1980, a housekeeper leaving a personalized note for a family, celebrating their reunion, the concierge team collaborating to recreate a guest's proposal from 20 years ago, local residents stopping by just to share their Monarch memories. The hotel's reputation was spreading. Other properties facing similar corporate raiders sought advice. Industry publications wrote about the Monarch model of balancing tradition with progress. But more importantly, guests were returning, not just for luxury amenities, but for the genuine hospitality that made each stay special. "We found another one," Claire called excitedly, hurrying from the heritage room. She carried a newly discovered cache of Margaret's documents hidden behind a panel in the original telephone. Operator's station. More evidence, but also stories. She recorded everything. Every kindness, every connection, every moment that made this place more than just a hotel. Rhodes took the weathered papers carefully, add them to the archive, but more importantly, make sure we're creating our own records. Today's small moments become tomorrow's precious memories. Mr. Whitaker watched it all with satisfied eyes. You know what Margaret would say about all this? What's that? She'd say we didn't just save a hotel, we proved that some things can't be measured in profit margins, that true hospitality is about heart, not just service, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remember what matters most. The morning sun climbed higher, casting its light across the Monarch's renewed spaces. In every corner, the past and present merged seamlessly, creating something timeless yet new. The hotel's renaissance was more than physical restoration. It was a revival of spirit, a recommitment to the values that had made it special from the beginning. And somewhere, Rhodes liked to think, Margaret Whitaker was smiling. 6 months after the attempted takeover, Rhodes found himself once again wheeling luggage through the Monarch's front entrance. This time, however, he wasn't undercover. He was checking in openly, continuing the practice he'd started of spending 1 week each quarter experiencing the hotel as a guest. "Welcome back, Mr. Calloway," Melody greeted him warmly. She'd been promoted to front office manager, but still worked regular desk shifts, believing managers should stay connected to daily operations. "Your usual room is ready." "Not the executive suite," he reminded her with a smile. "Regular room, regular service." The lobby hummed with the energy of a fully booked hotel. The morning pianist played softly. Fresh flowers graced every surface. And most importantly, genuine interactions happened everywhere he looked. Staff members greeted guests by name, sharing stories and creating connections that went beyond typical luxury service. Quarterly results just came in, Isabella approached, tablet in hand. But instead of immediately launching into numbers, she pointed to a young couple being checked in. "Remember them? They had their first date here 2 months ago. Now they're back to celebrate their engagement." The hotel's success metrics had been completely redefined. While financial performance remained important and had actually improved significantly, other measures now carried equal weight. Guest return rates and emotional connections, staff satisfaction and longevity, community impact and involvement. Preservation of history and traditions, creation of new memorable moments. "The Heritage Program launches next week," Isabella continued. This was her pride and joy, an initiative that paired long-time guests with first-time visitors, sharing stories and creating connections across generations of Monarch patrons. Near the concierge desk, William, now head of guest experience training, was mentoring a new staff member. "Listen to what they're not saying," Rhodes overheard him explain. "Sometimes the most important request is the one they're hesitant to make." The lessons of true hospitality were being passed down, strengthened by modern tools, but never replaced by them. The digital systems Morrison had installed now enhanced personal service instead of substituting for it. "Mr. Calloway?" a familiar voice called. Mr. Whitaker approached, accompanied by a group of students from the hotel management program the Monarch had established with the local university. "Would you mind sharing your story with our future hoteliers?" Rhodes looked at the eager young faces and remembered his own early days in hospitality. "Actually," he said, "I have a better idea. Tell them about Margaret, about how one person's dedication to genuine hospitality can transform not just a hotel, but countless lives." As Mr. Whitaker began his tale, Rhodes noticed the students' reactions. They weren't just hearing about hotel operations or service standards. They were learning about the heart of hospitality, the power of human connection in an increasingly digital world. The evidence of the Monarch's revival was everywhere. The guest books had returned to every room, now accompanied by tablets that let visitors read past entries and add their own. The Margaret Whittaker Memorial Fund had already helped dozens of people, from struggling guests to aspiring hospitality workers. The Advisory Council, led by the original guardians, ensured that every modernization decision preserved the hotel's essential character. Regular guests who had drifted away during Morrison's tenure had returned, bringing new generations to experience the Monarch's magic. "Look who's here." Isabella nodded toward the entrance. The Wellingtons, the loyal guests whose letter had first prompted Rhodes's undercover mission, were returning for their first visit since the changes. "Welcome home," Rhodes greeted them personally. Their response told the whole story. "It's like walking back in time," Mrs. Wellington said, tears in her eyes. "But better. The warmth is back, but there's something new too. Something timeless," her husband finished, like the best of the past and present together. In the newly restored Crown and Scepter Bar, the live pianist had been joined by local jazz musicians, a new tradition of evening performances that brought the community into the hotel. The bartender, Marcus, still entertained guests with his mixing skills, but now also shared stories of the Monarch's history. The hotel's reputation had spread far beyond Chicago. Industry publications regularly featured articles about the Monarch Revolution, how one historic hotel had found a way to thrive in the modern era while preserving its soul. Other properties facing similar challenges sought advice, leading to the creation of a hospitality heritage consulting program. Even some former adversaries had found redemption. Claire, once part of Morrison's conspiracy, had become an passionate advocate for preserving hotel histories. Her work in organizing and digitizing the Monarch's archives was setting new standards for hospitality heritage preservation. "Have you seen this?" Isabella handed Rhodes a letter. It was from the National Historic Hotels Registry, announcing the Monarch's selection for a special award, Excellence in Heritage Preservation and Modern Innovation. But the real reward was in the daily moments, a child's face lighting up when the bellhop remembered her favorite candy, an elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary in the same room where they'd spent their honeymoon, a business traveler finding a handwritten note welcoming them home, staff members proud to be part of something more meaningful than just luxury service. Rhodes made his way to his room, a standard king with a city view. The same room where 6 months ago, as Griffin Parker, he'd first begun to understand what his hotel was losing. Now it represented something else, the understanding that true luxury wasn't about thread counts or brand names, but about making people feel valued. On the desk sat a leather-bound guest book, its pages filled with stories, old and new. Rhodes opened it, took out a pen, and began to write. 6 months ago, I checked into this room as someone else, trying to save what I thought was just a building. Instead, I rediscovered what Margaret Whittaker knew all along, that a great hotel is more than walls and windows. It's a keeper of stories, a creator of memories, a place where lives intersect in meaningful ways. The Monarch stands today not because we preserved its structure, but because we protected its heart. Every guest who walks through our doors becomes part of an ongoing story, one that began long ago and will continue long after we're gone. This is more than a hotel. This is home. 1 year to the day after Rhodes had first checked in as Griffin Parker, the Monarch Hotel hosted a very special event. The grand ballroom, where the dramatic confrontation with Morrison had unfolded, was now filled with a different kind of energy as hundreds gathered for the first annual Margaret Whittaker Hospitality Symposium. Welcome to the future of traditional hospitality, Rhodes addressed the assembled crowd. Hotel owners, industry leaders, and hospitality students from around the world had come to learn how the Monarch had not just survived a corporate raid, but emerged stronger by staying true to its principles. In the front row sat Mr. Whitaker, now serving as the hotel's official historian. Beside him were the original guardians, Isabella, Salvador, Melody, and Frank, each now leading departments that blended time-honored traditions with thoughtful innovation. 1 year ago, Rhodes continued, we faced a choice between profit and purpose, between efficiency and humanity. We chose both, proving that true hospitality can adapt without losing its soul. The evidence of this philosophy was everywhere. The Monarch had become a living laboratory for the future of historic hotels. The newly established training academy, housed in what was once Morrison's executive suite, welcomed hospitality professionals from around the world. They came to learn not just service techniques, but the art of creating meaningful connections in a digital age. "Show them the numbers," Isabella whispered, passing Rhodes a tablet. The statistics told a compelling story. Guest satisfaction, scores at historic highs, staff turnover at record lows, revenue exceeding pre-Morrison levels, social media engagement through authentic stories, not marketing, community involvement, transforming the hotel into a true Chicago landmark. But the real success stories walked through the Monarch's doors every day. A young couple approached Rhodes after his speech. "We met here during the corporate raid," the woman explained. "I was a housekeeper, he was in maintenance. We both joined the Guardians. Now," she proudly displayed her management trainee badge. Throughout the hotel, similar transformations had taken place. Entry-level staff saw clear paths to advancement. Veterans found new purpose sharing their knowledge. Every employee understood they were part of something greater than just a luxury hotel. "The Margaret Whitaker Memorial Fund has expanded," Mr. Whitaker announced to the symposium attendees. What started as a guest assistance program now includes scholarships, community outreach, and historic preservation grants. "My wife believed in turning darkness into light. Now her legacy helps others do the same." The fund had already supported 10 other historic hotels facing corporate raiders, providing legal assistance and strategies for maintaining independence while modernizing thoughtfully. The Monarch model was becoming a movement. In the Heritage Room, now a popular spot for both guests and industry professionals, Claire led tours through the expanded archives. Margaret's hidden documents had been joined by new collections, stories and artifacts from hotels around the world, creating a living history of hospitality. "Each hotel has its own soul," Claire explained to visitors. "Our job isn't just to preserve buildings, but to protect the intangible things that make them special." The Monarch's technological evolution had taken an unexpected turn. Instead of replacing human interaction, digital tools now enhanced it. The guest preference system helped staff anticipate needs while leaving room for surprise and delight. Mobile apps included options for both efficient self-service and enhanced personal attention. Social spaces balanced private corners with areas for connection. Historic features were preserved while adding modern comforts thoughtfully. "Remember this?" Isabella showed Rhodes a photo from the morning everything changed. His first breakfast as Griffin Parker, overhearing the elderly guest's story that would unlock the whole conspiracy. That same breakfast service was now famous for different reasons. Chef Marcus had trained his team to balance efficiency with personal attention. The buffet offered both quick business options and leisurely traditional service. Every guest could choose their level of interaction. "We're not just running a hotel," Rhodes told the symposium audience. "We're protecting a legacy while building a future. Every decision we make asks one question: does this strengthen or weaken our ability to create meaningful experiences?" The Guardian's influence had spread beyond the Monarch. Other hotels began forming their own employee councils, recognizing that frontline staff often understood guest needs better than corporate consultants. As if to prove the point, a small drama unfolded near the ballroom entrance. A guest had arrived early for check-in, clearly distressed after a difficult flight. Within moments, staff members mobilized. The concierge arranged early room access. Room service prepared a comfort meal from the guest's previous stay. Housekeeping expedited room preparation. The spa held a spot for a stress-relieving treatment. No management approval needed, no forms to fill out, just employees empowered to show genuine care. "That's what Morrison never understood," Mr. Whitaker observed. "You can't spreadsheet human kindness. You can't efficiency expert your way to meaningful connections." The symposium would conclude with a gala dinner, where the Monarch would announce its next evolution, a foundation to help other historic properties find their balance between tradition and progress. But for Rhodes, the real celebration was in the quiet moments, a bellhop spending extra time with an elderly guest, learning family stories, a housekeeper leaving personalized welcome notes, a maintenance worker proud to explain the building's history, a new employee being mentored in the art of anticipating unspoken needs. "Margaret would have loved this," Mr. Whitaker said softly. "Not just the hotel's success, but how its spirit has spread. Her legacy lives in every act of genuine hospitality." The Monarch had become more than a model for hotel operations. It was proof that in an age of digital efficiency and corporate standardization, the human touch still mattered most. And somewhere in the bustling corridors, new stories were being written, new memories created, new chapters added to a legacy that would continue long into the future. As the Margaret Whitaker Hospitality Symposium drew to a close, Rhodes found himself drawn to the Monarch's rooftop garden, another restored feature that Morrison had deemed inefficient. The Chicago skyline sparkled in the evening light, but his attention was on the gathering taking place in the garden's intimate event space. Mr. Whitaker stood surrounded by hotel staff, both old and new, sharing stories about Margaret and the early days of the Monarch. But this wasn't just reminiscence, it was a passing of the torch, ensuring that the hotel's spirit would live on through its people. "She always said every guest had a story," the elderly man recalled, his voice strong despite the late hour. "Our job wasn't just to provide a room, but to become part of their story in a meaningful way." The aftermath of the corporate raid had brought unexpected revelations. Morrison, facing federal charges, had finally revealed the full scope of Phoenix Holdings' operations. Dozens of historic hotels targeted for destruction, each harboring some secret from the city's past that powerful people wanted buried. But the Monarch had done more than just survive their attack. It had sparked a movement across the hospitality industry, proving that success could come from embracing tradition rather than erasing it. Isabella approached with a leather-bound book, not a guest book this time, but a collection of letters from hotels around the world that had adopted the Monarch model. "Listen to this," she said, opening to a marked page. "Our occupancy was falling. Corporate wanted to sell. Then we heard about the Monarch. Now, 6 months after implementing their principles, we're not just profitable. We're creating memories that keep guests coming back." Rhodes smiled, remembering his own journey from profit-focused CEO to guardian of hospitality's true values. The changes at the Monarch had transformed more than just the hotel. The Margaret Whitaker Memorial Fund had expanded into a full foundation, helping other historic properties resist corporate raiders while modernizing thoughtfully. Its first major project, saving the Ambassador in San Francisco, one of the hotels Morrison had previously helped destroy. The Guardian's influence spread far beyond Chicago, Isabella now conducted workshops for hotel staff worldwide, teaching them to balance efficiency with humanity. Salvador's maintenance preservation program became an industry standard. Melody's guest relations techniques were taught in hospitality schools. Even some former adversaries found redemption. Claire's work in preserving hotel histories had earned international recognition. Several board members who'd initially supported Morrison now championed the preservation of historic properties. "Mr. Calloway," a young voice interrupted his thoughts. A hospitality student, one of many who'd attended the symposium, stood nervously clutching a notebook. "Could you tell us about the moment you decided to go undercover, when you realized something was wrong?" Rhodes looked around at the assembled faces, students, staff, industry veterans, all eager to understand the Monarch's transformation. But the truth was both simpler and more profound than they imagined. "It wasn't one moment," he said. "It was thousands of small moments I'd stopped seeing. The way a bellhop's genuine smile can make a tired traveler feel welcome. How a remembered preference makes a guest feel valued. The quiet pride of a housekeeper ensuring every detail is perfect." He gestured to the hotel spreading below them. Morrison thought he could reduce hospitality to numbers and algorithms. But what makes a great hotel can't be measured in spreadsheets. It's the stories we become part of, the memories we help create, the human connections we foster. As if, to prove his point, a scene unfolded in the garden. An elderly couple, celebrating their anniversary, was surprised by hotel staff with a recreation of their first dance from 50 years ago, in the very spot where it had happened. The woman's tears of joy, the husband's trembling smile, the gentle music floating up to the rooftop. This was the essence of true hospitality. "The future of hotels isn't about choosing between tradition and technology," Rhodes continued. "It's about using modern tools to enhance timeless values. Every innovation should serve one purpose, helping us connect more meaningfully with our guests." Mr. Whitaker joined them, carrying something carefully wrapped in cloth. "Margaret wanted you to have this," he said, presenting the package to Rhodes. "She left instructions that it should be given to whoever truly understood what the Monarch meant." Inside was a key, not to any room, but to the hotel's original front door from 1974. Attached was a note in Margaret's elegant handwriting. "The key to hospitality isn't in our locks or our systems, but in our hearts. Guard it well." The rooftop. Gathering had grown, staff and symposium attendees drawn by the storytelling and sense of history being made. As the sun set behind the Chicago skyline, Rhodes looked at the faces around him, each person a guardian of the Monarch's legacy in their own way. The hotel had survived its darkest hour not through corporate strategies or efficiency measures, but through the power of human connection. Every day its halls witness small miracles of hospitality, a concierge remembering a child's birthday, a chef recreating a guest's grandmother's recipe, a housekeeper leaving encouraging notes for a grieving visitor, a maintenance worker, sharing the building's history with fascinated tourists. These weren't just service interactions, they were moments of genuine human care, the kind that no algorithm could replicate and no spreadsheet could measure. "You know what Margaret would say about all this?" Mr. Whitaker asked, gesturing to the thriving hotel below. "What's that?" "She'd say we didn't just save a building. We proved that in a world obsessed with digital connection, real human connection matters more than ever. And that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is remember what truly matters." As night fell over the Monarch Hotel, its lights shone like beacons in the darkness. Within its walls, countless stories continued to unfold. Stories of celebration and solace, of beginnings and reunions, of ordinary moments made extraordinary through the simple art of genuine hospitality. The legacy of Margaret Whittaker lived on, not just in plaques and programs, but in every sincere smile, every remembered preference, every moment when a guest felt truly at home. And in the end, that was what the Monarch had always been about, not just providing luxury or comfort, but creating a place where the simple act of caring for others could transform lives, one story at a time.